This was like me honestly thinking there was no LSD left in this vial, and what had happened was it had recrystallized, and so because they didn't use the right emulsifier, and so I was swirling a Q-tip around this bottle, and me and my friend were jokingly like licking it, being like, hopefully this is enough, and then like, oof, just like the whole world disintegrated. I started having the strongest synesthesia I've ever had in my life, like so much so that it was just, I mean, I turned into a blob.
Ryan Sprague, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Dude, I am so excited to be here, Zach. This is going to be an absolute blast, and I'm sure we might get into this in this extended riff, but I just got done with my first week in a Kabala at the mystery school, and I am on such a high vibration right now. I was talking to someone else in class about this. It's almost incomprehensible, and we can definitely dive into that whole thing, but I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah. we can dive into that right now, actually, because Kabala, I've never heard of the Kabala Mystery School. What is that?
Yeah, so the mystery school itself is called the Modern Mystery School, and there's many of these around the world, but the Modern Mystery School is kind of like the... I don't want to call it just the Western chapter. It's not just the Western chapter, but it's the only sect of the mystery school that allows the everyday person to join, right? Otherwise, you need to be invited in. It's like the name states, kind of a mystery. And so it's based on an 8,500-year-old Hermetic lineage stemming from the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus and then updated later on by King Solomon. And it's really like a path to empowerment, liberation, and freedom. Is how I would describe it. And so there's like many different things you can do within this school. Everything from, DNA activations that bring your DNA back to full potential, initiations, and Kabbalah. And so Kabbalah is kind of the whole idea of it is ascending the tree of life. And so you're going through these sephiras, which are essentially like, you can think of them looking same, but different to chakras, but they're not chakras. They're different energetic systems. But essentially, it's 10 different ways to view yourself as God, really. And God is kind of a charged term for people. You can change that out for quantum, source, universe, whatever someone listening wants to call it. But it's 10 different ways in which to view yourself as God, and also to hold certain energies of God. So right now we're in the first one, which is Malkuth, which is very earth energy. So we start in earth and we go all the way up to like the tasting God at the end of this 10-month journey. So it's been a fascinating evolution for me getting into this. And I found out about it about a year ago. It was actually, just about a year ago this weekend that I found out about it watching Gaia on Zero Gravity. I was actually connecting with some cannabis in ceremony and finished up my ceremony and was like, well, what do I want to do? And my normal pattern is to get shit done. So I was like, nope, I'm going to go against that. I'm going to actually relax. And so I was getting the call to watch more Gaia, right? I was like, I didn't have any form of entertainment at that point. I wasn't watching TV. And I was really needing something like that because I was working way too late. And I was just like, okay, I need something. I don't want to just drown out on Netflix. Not that Netflix is bad, but it just at that point, I was like, I don't want to just like waste my time with that. So I was like, well, let me download Gaia. So I download Gaia. And that night I get the call.
Is Gaia a show? Is it a...
Yeah.
What is Gaia?
Yeah, good question. So it's a network, kind of like Netflix, but for high-level consciousness media. So if you know Ben Stewart, he has Psychedelica and Limitless on there. So there's like millions of different, not millions, but there's a lot of different shows on there, documentaries, things about like, I've been nerding out in this show right now called Ancient Civilizations, which is all about ancient Sumeria and all the stories of the Bible and like the kind of like the behind the scenes one.
Is that with Graham Hancock?
Yeah.
Graham Hancock, Ancient Civilizations?
Yeah.
I've heard him talk about some of that stuff on Joe Rogan. It's absolutely insane, the way that he gets into fingerprints of the gods and how our conceptions of how civilizations have evolved may be completely flipped on their heads with the way that we will understand it or may understand it differently in the future. Just like all the artifacts and just like, I don't have it all in my head right now, but it's you've been watching it. So you know how much stuff there is where you can dig up something back in the day that completely rearranges the way that we talk about history. And Graham Hancock's been someone who has forced me to think differently about where we came from and how civilization started.
100%, man. One thing I realized really early on, I wasn't raised in any certain religion or anything, but I was aware of those things. And I realized I'm like, well, this just smells like bullshit to me. And that's me subjectively. So anyone listening, I'm not saying it is bullshit. I'm just saying it smelled like it to me. And so I was always on this ever quest, and I'm sure we'll get plenty into psychedelics and cannabis. But, when I first interacted with cannabis, that's what allowed me to start questioning everything. And so I've been on the deep spiritual journey for the last 10 years, just trying different things out, right? Just seeing what fits. And then that night, I found mystery teachings on Gaia. My heart just led me there, or intuition, whatever you want to call it. So I was connecting with cannabis. I was like, let me put my bed on zero gravity and actually relax, which is very foreign to me because like I'm an Aries and I like to just go constantly. So I'm like, all right, let me try this out. So I hop on Gaia. I found mystery teachings with Dr. Teresa Bullard, who's one of the highest ranking mystery school initiates in the world. And I didn't know that at that time. I just found the show, seemed cool, started watching it. She starts talking about Kabala and the life activation and getting initiated. And I'm like, wait, what the fuck is this, right? So she ends up speaking about Modern Mystery School. So literally I'm in my bed. I go on my phone. I find a practitioner near me. I sign up for a life activation, which is the first step. And 2 days later, I get activated. A week later, I get initiated. And then a week after that, I get my full spirit activation, which allows you to commune with your soul and all your emotions more actively, which for men specifically, I found this to be very beneficial. And so that started my journey into the mystery school. And so I've been in there for a year doing different healings and stuff. But Kabbalah is like the biggest step I've taken so far. And it's fucking fun. Like I'm having an absolute blast so far. I mean, it's only been one weekend, but so far so good.
Yeah. You mentioned viewing yourself as a god in 10 different ways, and the spirit activation. Is that does the god refer to your ego? How are you switching between these alternative views of gods, and how does that interact with the spirit activation?
Yeah, great question. So what I'm going to get into is their creation story, right? So I'm not saying the creation story because, again, I've heard many different ones, and I'm not actually really sure what I choose to believe right now because they don't believe in reincarnation. So there's all these different things, right? But I'll state like kind of what they say about Kabbalah and the mind of God and all this stuff. So they view the ego as there's a negative part of the ego, which is kind of like the reptilian part that like wants to rationalize and keep you safe. And it came about from evolution, right? Like there was a time where we needed that, right? We needed to like kind of like play small a little bit to make sure we were safe. But then there's this other half of the ego that's kind of like the better half of the ego in layman's terms. But the challenge is that the ego, it's programmed from 0 to 20 in our programming ages from society, parents, etc., who probably had the best of intentions, but they learned the things they taught us. Don't do this. Don't talk that way. Don't look like this. You got to do this. They learned all that from their programming ages. And, it just goes on and on and on. And so essentially what Kabbalah and the whole mystery school is about moving past that programming. And so it's not that much different if you think about it that way than any spiritual path. But the thing that I find really exciting about it is that for me, I've touched a lot of different buttons in the spiritual world, and they're all fantastic. I do breath work every day. I meditate every day, all these things. But for me, I like to know there's like a specific path that I can walk and follow. And so the mystery school was the first structured approach that wasn't religion that I found that I really liked and I resonated with. And so like there's a progression, right? And this whole lineage, it's based off of, like I said, it was updated with King Solomon. And so if you've ever heard of the Freemasons built King Solomon's church. And so that's how they fit into this whole thing. So they heard a lot of the stuff that King Solomon was teaching all of the people he was teaching because they were building the church he was teaching it in. So it's so, fascinating. And if you think about Hermes Trismegistus, he's actually, rumor has it that he was Thoth, right? So he lived, some ridiculous amount of time, 36,000 years, something crazy like that. And he had different incarnations. And so, he was, if you read the Emerald Tablets, he was Thoth, the Atlantean king. Then he went to Kem, which was Egypt when it was still a rainforest. And he brought all the people that survived from Atlantis over to there. And then they colonized there. And so it's just such a fascinating story. But, what I've found about Kabbalah is that there's like different energies you can interact with, right? There's like physical, dense earth energy. There's like, there's different types of energy with creation and love and all these different things. And then also, as you get closer and closer to the top, the last Sephirah is called Kether. which is essentially synonymous with the crown chakra. But again, they're not the same system, but you can think about it that way. For anyone listening, they're probably aware of chakras. So it's like a very big connection to the divine. And so throughout the year, you're moving through these different energetic cycles and seeing kind of like where you're feeling really good and where you might be stuck. And that's like maybe your shadow coming up. And then they have these two paths, which are healer's path or the ritual master path. And the way that I look at it is the healer's path is holding more light so you can be a healer. And the ritual path is being able to work with the shadow and being able to like use rituals and different magical practices to be able to like overcome your own shadow and therefore be able to help other people overcome their shadow too. So it's really interesting. It's a deep rabbit hole, and I don't, pretend to know everything about it by any means, but I'm learning more and more every time I go to one of these workshops.
The creative energy is interesting though, because the more I make things, the more I make podcasts, the more I write, the more, anything, just recording mediocre freestyle on some beat that I've been obsessed with, the more I feel like me making it, the perception that I make it is false, and the perception of energy running through me where I don't know where it comes from seems more like the way to approach creativity and what I feel like is actually happening. And it sounds crazy. Maybe we don't have the tools to actually observe it yet, but when I'm really in flow state during a podcast, whatever it is, I feel like there's something running through me that I open myself to. I'm not making it. It's not internal. I didn't create it from myself. It didn't spawn from within me. It's something that, because I was open to it, the energy kind of let itself into me, and that is coming through me in the form of a podcast. And the more I feel like I am a vessel for things that are bouncing around in the universe, and everyone else is too. It's just a matter of what you're open to.
Yeah.
And I actually listened to a TED Talk recently. It was Elizabeth Gilbert, the author of Eat, Pray, Love. And she talks about the muse and how when she is writing, she feels more and more like it's her job is just to sit down and be open to it. And then eventually the muse will come. It comes in different forms every day. Some days it doesn't come at all, but it's not your job to fire up the furnace in a sense. Like that furnace is out there. Your job is to just kind of kindle it and watch over it and show up every day. So I don't know if that's exactly what you were talking about with creative energy, but that's sort of where my mind has been recently, kind of taking off the burden from myself to make things and just showing up and trusting in the process that something will eventually come out. Sometimes it's shitty, sometimes it's great, a lot of times it's in between, but like just learning to show up and kind of feel that energy run through you. Hey guys, this is a quick reminder that the two best ways you can support the show are by 1, leaving a rating and comment on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. This is like foreplay for the algorithm because it revs it up and makes our show appear higher in searches. And number 2, you can subscribe to AUXORO Premium at auxoro.supercast.com, where for $5 a month you get bonus episodes and more exclusive content. Thank you for however you choose to support the show.
100%. I think we're talking about a very similar thing. And it reminds me of this Hindu proverb, which I'm going to butcher, but I'll give you guys the basis of it. So I'm in a lot of different groups. I just nerd out on Facebook and things like that, which I barely ever go on, but I'm on all these like psychedelics and philosophy groups and all this stuff. And, I'll see people in there that will start shit talking a certain thing like, oh, don't give your energy to angel numbers because they're just leading you away from your own power and all these different things, right? Where in reality, I'm like, listen, if it makes you happy, go for it, I think, right? As long as it's not hurting you, cocaine might make you happy, but that's probably going to be a detriment after a while, but the Hindu, it's like, don't just go out and do whatever makes you happy because you might not actually know what true happiness really is. So there's an awareness stage,
and you don't even know if you're actually doing a certain drug. You might think you're doing something that's close to pure cocaine, and you're just snorting fentanyl and baby powder. And you're like, this is not what I thought would happen. It's dangerous out there in the Colombiana realm of things right now. There's definitely a lot of shady shit going on.
Dude, there is, man. I've been following a lot of stories of that, and I'm sure we can get into something like that too. But this Hindu proverb was basically saying like, there's a million different paths to get to the same goal, right? The only people that are like getting it wrong are the people going around telling everyone that their path isn't the right one, you know? And so like I tell everyone, I'm like, listen, you might think everything with mystery school is bullshit. Cool, that's fine. Might not be your thing. I'm not over here saying that like, this is the only way. You have to do it this way. What I found is I've done a lot of different things. For me, I really enjoy shamanic cultures, specifically around plant medicine and their other teachings, and I enjoy the mystery school. And they do overlap a good amount too. Mystery school talks a lot about shamanism. They're not too big on plant medicines. Totally fine. I don't believe you need plant medicines to get to these places, but for me, I find a very deep connection specifically with Santa Maria, with cannabis. And I also find different connections with different plants as well. And I'm curious, you know, and so like I've done a lot of different past life regressions and have been brought into past lives where I've been a medicine man and a shaman, or maybe even a medicine woman. And, you know, I think the magician for me is kind of like the archetype that I enjoy the most. You know, creation, play, laughter, you know, diving into all these things. That's something that I've always felt very connected to. And so it's so interesting because I feel like, you know, a lot of our lives are figuring out our own story, right? And that kind of sounds obvious, but what I mean by that is not just like our story of what we do in life, but like why we're here, where we come from, where we're going, and what our purpose is, you know? And I think those like questions really can, if you contemplate on those, and this is one of the reasons I love specifically cannabis, because it's such a great contemplation medicine. If you just contemplate on like, who am I, right? And then you can change the inflection tone on that. Who am I? Or who am I, right? Like these kind of things in a sober state with our beta brainwaves and everything, you might not notice many differences, at least for me. But when I start connecting with cannabis or another plant medicine and I ask those questions, what I found is that there's different things that come forth depending on what inflection tone. And then what I can do is then integrate that into my day-to-day life without plant medicines included, like cannabis. So that's a big part of what I talk about. And I'm sure we'll dive into this heavy, but you know, I don't want anyone to think this or hear this and go, oh, so I need to interact with plant medicine every day. It's like, no. You can get the downloads from them and then integrate them into your day-to-day life so that you don't have to fall into dependency and things like that. Because again, we want people to be empowered just in their sober state of reality, right? You can have these things as teachers, but just like if you learn from a great teacher or a coach, they're not holding your hand through every aspect of life, right? Eventually you're like, all right, cool. Let me close this Zoom call or whatever. And let me go try what you just taught me, you know?
Yeah. Let's dive into it. So one of the things that you've said on, I believe it was an Instagram video, and this mantra or this way of thinking has been something that's consistently popped up in your feed, which I love. You've said that you look at cannabis as a mirror. And so what makes cannabis a mirror to you? How do you use cannabis as a mirror? And I should also make clear that we're talking about THC cannabis, because I know people have different lingo. They'll say smoking weed, whatever, Mary Jane. So we're talking about THC cannabis as a mirror. What makes it a mirror to you?
Yeah, so this is a great question. And, you know, for me, I think all plant medicines work in this way, all psychedelics, right? They all can act as a mirror. But I think cannabis, you know, because cannabis actually, what I feel connects us more to our human experience. Whereas like, say if you do ayahuasca or even like a heavy dose of mushrooms or peyote or any of these things, they can bring you a little bit farther out, right? And almost allow you to go home, whatever that is for someone, God, source, universe, quantum realm, whatever. They allow you to have that experience. But what I believe is that since we're only here for 100, 150 years, fingers crossed if we're lucky, and we're there for eternity, based on what I believe anyway, I don't know if it's right, but why wouldn't I want to be here as much as possible? And so for me, cannabis helps connect me to my human experience, and that's why I love cannabis over other medicines. It's not that I don't like those and I don't interact with them, but cannabis is like Old Faithful for me. And so how I found it to work like a mirror is that, you know, I feel a lot of people externalize their power, especially right now with like, you know, for instance, someone gets triggered and they go, he or she or they made me feel this way, right? So this happens with cannabis a lot. Cannabis makes me anxious. Cannabis makes me lazy. And the first thing I teach people is cannabis doesn't make you anything. You make you who you are. And, you know, what a lot of people do is they use cannabis as a permission slip to be who they already are, but be able to have an excuse as to why they're that way, right? So, well, I wouldn't be lazy, but, you know, every time I smoke cannabis, it just makes me lazy. So that's the only reason I'm lazy. It's like, no, you're not. You're a lazy person already, you know? And so this mirror aspect, right? what I will tell you right now is that for anyone listening, you don't have to believe anything I'm going to say, but take this into consideration. If you choose to believe that cannabis is a mirror, right? And that all plant medicines are a mirror, and really everything in life is kind of a mirror, but we won't go to the all yet. But if we choose to believe that cannabis is a mirror, what can it show you about yourself? To me, that's much more empowering than thinking that you just fingers cross it when you interact with this plant and you get random results, right? So I like to look at this plant as a system of divination. And so it can allow us to learn things about ourselves. Just like when you pull from the I Ching, right? You read a riddle after you get your hexagrams, and then you actually think about what is this meaning, or what does this reading mean to me? Because it's not like you will win $1 million if you buy scratch ticket 37, right? Like those aren't the readings you get. It might be like, to find more wealth and look within. And you're like, what does that mean? Right? And so cannabis works in a very similar way, where if you find yourself maybe, relaxing or using cannabis a lot or any of these things, you can actually start asking the plant, hey, why am I going to you so much, right? What's going on here? What am I running from in my life that's allowing me to, go into this medicine so frequently? Because I think that's one of the things that, a lot of people don't recognize is that cannabis, like anything else, has great power. And with great power comes great responsibility. Yes.
We're back from the technical difficulty into cannabis as a mirror, returning to divination.
Yeah. So, just like if you pull the I Ching and you get different hexagrams that tell you like, hey, to find more wealth, look within, you have to actually think about what does that mean to me, right? So it's allowing you to use your own intuition to take something and actually make your own meaning out of it, because humans are meaning-making machines. And so with cannabis, what I teach people is that if you choose to believe it's a mirror, well, now you have this system to be able to actually go, okay, what is cannabis showing me about myself? So if you start interacting with cannabis and you feel anxiety come up, right? Instead of externalizing your power onto the plant by saying, oh, cannabis just makes me anxious, you could say, hey, is there something going on in my life right now that maybe I'm unaware of or keeping myself too busy to feel in my day-to-day life that is now coming up for the opportunity for me to heal it? And so like for me, I always look at like what is more empowering, what is more disempowering. And for me, realizing that cannabis is here to help me and that I can take ownership over my experience with it and take accountability for it, that's much more empowering. And it didn't always work that way. Like I went through my phase of how I got here today of externalizing my power onto the plant and, telling myself that, oh, it was cannabis that made me lazy and all of these things. And that's why I can speak to this, because I know I've lived both sides and I know what side for me personally is more empowering. And so that's a huge part of what I teach in the program. And this is part of the 3 different ways to understand the language cannabis speaks. The first being that it's feminine medicine, right? So therefore we need to give it a direction for it to know where we want to go, aka through intention. That it's a mirror, which we already covered, and then that it's imagination medicine. Because from imagination, we can actually look at our habits. And from our habits, we can create new belief structures. And from our belief structures, that actually creates our experience of life. And our habits really create us in a lot of ways too. And so, understanding those different ways and having someone that's listening to this just go, okay, don't believe it right off the bat just because I said it, right? Take this and try it in your own life. Because again, here I am saying, go back to your intuition. So I would never sit here after and go, this is definitely 100% the way it is. This is just the way I teach it. And this is the way that I allow people to go, okay, let me try this on and see what happens if I take these beliefs on. And if someone listening likes them, cool, run with it and make them your own, right? But I think that one of the challenges in society right now, and I don't want to go down conspiracy alley and say it's happening on purpose or anything, but it's just happening, is that a lot of people are like, do this diet. This is the best diet. Drink this much water per day. They're telling people what to do. And then people are going, okay, I guess I'll do that. Instead of going, hey, are you drinking enough water? And what does enough water look like for you? Let me present some evidence of different studies. And then you can take this, try this much water out and see if that works for you. Or, hey, have you thought about carnivore diet? Maybe it works for you. Maybe it doesn't. Try it out and see what happens, But I think there is no objective reality. I mean, quantum physics has proven this. So everything that I teach, my mission is to point people back to their own truth. Hey, I'm here to give you information, but if you don't like that information, don't follow it, right? Because that would be going against your own individual truth. And so that's my ultimate mission. Yeah.
It's weird how people lock on to, because this is the way for me, that this is the way. This is the way for everyone that's ever had an experience. And people have such a complex setup of biology and amalgamations of experiences that we don't even fully understand yet. So to do something like figure out what the right amount of water for you in a day is, and to say that everyone has to drink this amount of water because it works for me. I have friends that are literally camels. They will drink a glass of water and be good for an entire day, whereas I immediately put salt in some water. I chug 3 or 4 protein shakers full of water by noon.
Yes.
And I love the way that makes me feel. It makes me feel awake. It gives me a jolt. I feel the salt, and drinking water in an empty stomach is almost like a low key coffee, the way that it makes me feel in the morning. But I would never say that everyone has to put a teaspoon of Himalayan salt in a protein shaker and just chug it right to the face 5 minutes after they wake up. And same thing with drugs. Same thing. You know, it's so complex, and everyone has the desired slice of reality that they're trying to enter when they put an amount of drug in their system. And to say that this is the amount that's worked for me, this is the drug that worked for me, this doesn't work for me, and to then extrapolate that onto every single person's experience, that to me has I've been guilty of going towards that path occasionally, where I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is the way to do it for everyone. But I remember how much stress that the way that other people have spoken like that had caused me, because I kind of get locked into this, oh, I'm doing it wrong. Like, I have to do this. I have to take the milkiest bong rip I've ever done right off the bat, even though I haven't smoked in 3 months, and because everyone else is doing it. Oh my God, the joint's coming around a 4th time. I already feel like I'm leaving the planet. I have to take another hit again. Like, just like the way that the comparison of how everyone else reacts to something and then putting that onto yourself is that is an anxiety on its own. Like, I could, whenever I think about that, I feel some baseline level of anxiety of, this is making me anxious just thinking about that I'm doing it the quote unquote wrong way. So I appreciate that perspective that you have with cannabis, where you've found the way that's worked for you and the people that you also work with. And it's not like this kind of cringy pill that you see on YouTube where people are saying like, take this and I'm trying to sell as much as possible. And this is the way, without any sort of questioning of the motivations and kind of diving deep into the nuances of how people react to certain things.
Yeah. I think the world is changing, as I see it anyway, right? Again, no objective truths, but the way that I see it is the world is changing right now. And I think that, my ultimate mission with the Connect with Cannabis program, which is the main program we have right now, we're building Grow with Cannabis, which is coming out so fun. I'm so excited for it. But, it's like I've taken all these different programs and they teach you some really cool stuff. I've done some amazing programs that have literally changed my life, but they all point you back to someone else's version of what works, where that's not inherently bad. But for me, when I really thought about like what's going to allow people to be equipped with a skill set that's going to allow them to go into the world and be sovereign beings and create whatever they want to create, well, it's a system that teaches them how to be sovereign, right? And how to come from their own intuitive nature. And so what Connect with Cannabis is, which is the cannabis program I host, is it's a system of 10 different divination tools to use with cannabis. And by tools, I mean modalities, different exercises you go through, along with the science and a lot of the integration to back it up too, to be able to be your own guru. Because the age of the guru is dead, right? We don't want to false idolize people. We want to be able to come from our own truth. But sometimes our truth is clouded from that negative part of the ego, right? Because it's uploaded from 0 to 20 from other people's truths. And we don't even really realize it, right? It's almost like the first 20 years of our life are kind of just us taking in information. And then at a certain point, a lot of us go, oh shit, there's a lot of stuff about life that I don't like and I don't even know where to start. So if we actually start being able to get into there and start removing this programming and start actually putting in belief structures and things like that that we want in our lives because we believe in them, and then our lives will flourish as a result. So what I wanted to do with Connect with Cannabis is give someone a system that not only can they use for themselves, but they can also teach to others, people they love, people they serve in their work, that allow them to be sovereign again, that allow them to be able to say, okay, I'm going to connect with cannabis if that's what someone has discerned is right for them in their lives. I'm going to take this program, and at the end of this, I'm going to have a system so that anything that I want to do in life, right, if I can't figure out the answer on my own, I have this spirit, this plant spirit and ally to be able to connect with and go, okay, what am I truly feeling about this? And all the time that they're connecting with it, they have the tools to be able to bring that into their day-to-day life without cannabis. Because I wouldn't want people to leave the program and go, cool, now I need to connect with cannabis every day to have this connection. That's not what this is about. It's about how can we use this as a tool for self-awareness, for self-development, so that we can actually allow ourselves to become more intuitive in nature in our day-to-day lives. Because like Terrence McKenna said, when you get the message, you can hang up the phone for a little while. And I truly believe that it's an absence the heart it's an absence that the heart grows fonder. And so with cannabis, if you're interacting with it every day, and even anything, right? If you have a favorite food and you eat it every day, you don't really know what you love about it anymore because you just eat it every day. But if you take a week off or a month off, and then you come back to it, you start to notice all these subtleties that you didn't realize before. And you're like, oh my goodness, I thought that cannabis helped me with just these things, but actually it helps with all these things too. And so it's in those periods of separation that the heart grows fonder about things. And so I really, I recommend people to take regular breaks from cannabis, because that's not something that a lot of people say with regards to cannabis. They say it with plenty of other things, but cannabis is just kind of that thing, especially in the industry, where it's like, oh, you can just do this all day, every day. You won't get cancer. And it's like, well, you can definitely numb out your emotions, but it's not cannabis doing that. Once again, it's your patterns of using it, right? But there are things that people don't talk about. And again, with great power comes great responsibility. No one's going to come save the day for you when it comes to cannabis. It's just about gaining awareness. And if you are choosing to use this plant, making sure that you have enough information to make sure you're doing more good than harm with it.
And I love the metaphor of cannabis as a mirror. Because, we mentioned cocaine. There are other drugs that certainly aren't mirrors. Yeah. Cocaine's one of them. Alcohol is not a mirror. Molly is, to me at least, not a mirror. Like, they enhance when I use them correctly. Those drugs have enhanced the situations that I've been in and have brought me into the slice of reality that I was hoping to operate. Other times it hasn't, but that's part of the experience of using drugs, is learning how much and when to take a certain dose of something in order to enter the reality at the time that you want to be in. But I stopped smoking for a long time after college. So this is 5-6 years ago. And I've smoked a few times since, and thinking about the mirror analogy, it seems like a big part of my anxiety from smoking weed is that I'm expecting to smoke cannabis and have that cannabis have the effect of something like alcohol or ecstasy, where it's like this very pleasing feeling. And I'm not ready for the possibility of entering a challenging experience. Yeah. Because if it is a mirror, if it's showing you yourself, life is challenging as fuck. Like there's going to be a lot of challenging things when you look in that mirror. And when I first started smoking my freshman year in college, for whatever reason, I would get like obliterated out of my mind from the start, and I never had a challenging experience for years. And I know a lot of people have a similar story. Well, they start smoking, tolerance is not even a concern to them, because as high as they've gotten, they haven't had terrible panic attacks or anything like that. And then I started to get these waves of panic, and then eventually decided that I was going to take a step back from cannabis. And I've had a lot of time to think about my own experiences with it, and the way of framing cannabis, like you're looking into yourself rather than kind of looking into another version of yourself that you wish to become. It makes sense that that would cause a lot of anxiety. If you're having the expectation of an experience that's supposed to be, you're in a party atmosphere, everyone's having fun, all of a sudden these thoughts start running through your mind, like, oh my God, like everyone's watching me, I feel too high, like I don't want to say anything, and then that's like starting the whole anxiety spinning wheel. That is, it's super anxiety provoking, and it's the metaphor you use has, in the past few weeks, looking forward to this podcast, has been part of me reevaluating my own use of cannabis and how I can enter back into a better relationship with it.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought this up, because I imagine some of your listeners might be like, that's my challenge too right now. And I had that challenge too.
Oh, so many. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, so what I always tell people is this is where intention becomes very important, right? Because then say if, what the intention does is it gives you an anchor, right? So think about it this way, right? You're almost starting a journey, right? And then eventually you're going to be somewhere out here, let's just say, right? Now that might actually be within yourself with cannabis, but just for sake of analogy, because I have a screen here, say you're out here, right? Well, if you're just free floating out there, right? And then you start seeing things, right? You have no way in which to contextualize them. But if you have this anchor and you start seeing things, you go, why am I seeing all these things? Oh, maybe they're related to that thing. And so then you can see them happening for you and hijack your thoughts, your ego, back to a positive state. Now, it does not mean that you're going to be like, I'm so excited to face these challenges, but you're going to see them in the context of your intention, and you're going to realize this is exactly what I wished for, right? And so like that is really important, because if cannabis is a training ground, if plant medicines, what I believe, are a training ground to help you realize your power in the world of manifestation and all these things, then say if you make an intention to feel happier on the other side of that joint or that volcano bag or whatever it is, and then in your experience, you're starting to feel happy, and then boom, these anxious thoughts come up, right? Well, if you didn't make the intention, you're probably going to be like, oh my God, this wasn't supposed to happen. Coulda, shoulda, woulda, victim mentality, all that stuff, right? And now it's, oh my God, cannabis makes me anxious, and now you've externalized your power. So in that one experience, you've just done a whole lot of disempowering to yourself. And so on the other hand, if you made that intention successfully, you'll be able to go, why am I feeling these anxious thoughts? Well, I asked to be happy, and maybe this is why I'm not happy in every day of my life. Okay, let me continue asking cannabis, where does this anxiety come from? And maybe then you're brought back to a memory in childhood where maybe in social situations you got made fun of in grade school. Who knows what comes up, right? But all of a sudden you're like, that's interesting. But that's not the end of the experience, right? So then you got to actually integrate that. So then you actually have to take out a journal or something like that. There's many different integration methods, but you can take out a journal, you can start writing. And this is why I love cannabis as opposed to some other plant medicines, because you can do this while still in the ceremony. So you can start actually writing notes, which it's not that you can't do it if you're on a 5-gram mushroom trip, but it's going to be hard, right? It's going to be more challenging. Cannabis being the people's plant, it's like
your journal is going to start morphing into your dad's face or something. Like what is happening right now?
Yeah. And so like that's why I love cannabis, because it's, for me, it's the one that allows me to microdose that grandiose experience that you have on, say, 5-MeO, DMT, or ayahuasca. And I'm not saying microdosing as people might think about microdosing. What I'm saying is that if you're having a macro experience of like returning to God or source, whatever you want to call it, well, it's giving you a glimpse of that, right? So you're getting the feeling of like, oh shit, I'm starting to remember how powerful I am, but you're still in your human experience, which again, like I said before, for me, I like to be connected to my human experience, sensory awareness, all this stuff. So you're able to still write this stuff out and still be in the experience and still receive what I call ideas or downloads or any of these things. And so you're still able to do that. And then if you, let's say that intention again, right? Maybe you made it to be happy, you come up and find anxious thoughts, and then you start realizing, oh my goodness, this was a memory from childhood that, I remember getting bullied on the schoolyard or something like that. You can then start to write that down. And the next day you could go, okay, let me look at all these notes. What action steps could I take from this? So maybe I'm going to go work with a coach. Maybe I'm going to start actually journaling on a day-to-day basis about my childhood and see what else comes up in a completely sober state of mind, right? But you can now start taking that awareness you gained and start making it part of your everyday life. So that the next time you decide to connect with cannabis, cannabis goes, hey, that's really good that you've worked on that. Let me either show you a deeper level, or maybe in this experience, hey, you can experience happiness, right? And then in your day-to-day life, you can start experiencing more and more happiness as a result too, because you've done the work to actually do it. But a lot of people think it's the plant's job to do the work. The plant can illuminate and show you the what, but it's up to you to figure out the how.
Yeah. And I was definitely doing the how in a way that was not conducive to, having any sort of a pleasant, not that you can't have challenges within a pleasant experience, but like something that I would come away with cannabis have been a positive experience in that moment. I was definitely not going about the how, because for me, smoking weed at a party is an awful experience. And that was a lot of the moments where I chose to smoke cannabis. The last 3 or 4 years I was smoking was just like walking into a room with a lot of people I didn't know, getting high as fuck. Like, it's so hard in that situation to take a baby hit of weed, because I knew in my mind that would be what I needed in that moment. But everyone's passing the blunt. You're just like, oh my God, I just faced like 3/4 of a blunt. I'm not going to be able to get off this couch in the next 20 minutes. I'm drunk also. Like, so the situations have so much of an effect on the dosages, and I just wasn't able to navigate that as well. And it's like such a clusterfuck when you're trying to generate a positive experience and think the next morning, I had a great time in the moment. I'm having a good time right now. I'm thinking about things, but this isn't too, overwhelming to the point of where it's taking away from what I'm currently doing. To do that during college is honestly, again, for me, like, it was such an awful way to go about it. And I have a lot of friends that, they smoke more weed than they did in college, or they stopped smoking after college, but like they never really had those, they have a different relationship with it, where a party is the perfect time to smoke a joint. And that's amazing. But for me, I just trying to navigate that in the, freshman, sophomore year state of mind was just asking for a train wreck of a relationship with cannabis.
Yeah. I think that, again, we all come from the same source, but we're all very unique within that container. And so for me, I've noticed that I'm very sensitive to different people's energies. And so for me, interacting with cannabis in a social situation is not inherently bad or challenging. But what I've learned is that it really matters what people are in that social situation. So for me, if I'm with like 3 or 4 of my friends and we're going to, say, a concert or something, and I make the intention, hey, cannabis, right now, I'm not really looking for any downloads, insights. I want to feel more connected to the people I came with, and I have that solid container, I'll be fine. But let's say I go to a party that I don't know anyone at, which I don't think I'd ever do. But let's just say I go to a party that I don't know really anyone at. Maybe I know a friend of a friend or something like that. And then I connect with cannabis, even with the intention of like, hey, cannabis, I don't want any downloads, blah, blah, blah. I can start feeling everyone's energy around me. And it took me so long to realize what that was. Because for a lot of people listening, right, that might even sound woo-woo. And I totally get it. But like we hear these things like being an empath, picking up on other people's energy. But until like we work with someone who goes, that thing you're feeling, that's what that is, it's hard to actually contextualize it. And so what I've realized for me is that I'm very sensitive to other people's energies, which is why I love coaching so much, because I can feel shifts in energy and things like that. But also, it sets me up for a really interesting thing, because me going to music festivals for years and doing different psychedelics there, I was always like, wow, why do I feel sometimes like I'm touching God? Why do I feel other times like I want to crawl in a hole and die? Like, it was like so like black or white for me. And I was realizing like, oh, if I'm going to do something like that there, I'm going to need to do such a small dose, because it's going to be heightened by all the people around me. And so I feel like this is why we created Connect with Cannabis, because there's no user manual out there for cannabis, let alone the other psychedelics. Thank goodness there's some research coming out now, but there's a lot of quantitative data coming out, like here's what Delta 9 THC is, but not a lot of qualitative, like, hey, the person who grew your cannabis, that energy really matters, right? So we haven't even get into the growing part yet, so I won't go there yet, but I think that there's so much differentiality within the, let's just say, cannabis space, but it really extends to all the plant medicine space, that this is why I tell people, like, and this is another reason we made the program too, like if you're not doing some type of self-development stuff alongside your plant medicine use, you're just asking for a really challenging experience that you'll probably end up coming out of being small t traumatized from. Because if, say for me, I had an experience with mushrooms one time where I literally thought I was dying. Like I thought I ate mold, I thought my throat was closing up, and I thought I was going to die. So as anyone listening can imagine, that was a terrifying experience for me. But because I had done a lot of work alongside it, I went into my breathing. I started to realize, okay, I'm not actually dying. And then it was this huge like lesson for me, because this was at a younger age when I didn't really realize how strong things got when you went up in amounts. And so I decided to jump from like the normal eighth I did with my friends, this is during college, to like 7 grams. And I was like, oh, it won't be that big of a deal. And so I did that. And what I believe anyway, I don't know this objectively, but what I believe is that the spirit of mushrooms showed me like, hey, we're going to give you this real big challenge so that you don't fuck around like this. You know, luckily you're in the right setting, you're at your house, but like what would have happened if you had done this at a music festival, you know, in front of 50,000 people? Like, you know, those are the kind of things that, you know, I'm very grateful that I had the work alongside it, because I came out of that seeing like, oh, that was actually really essential. And now I can talk about this stuff on podcasts and hopefully help someone else, you know, take a breath when they're having a challenging experience, or ask themselves before, like, do I really need this much? You know, it's so important.
Oh yeah. If that was me, I would have rushed the stage, grabbed the microphone, and screamed at everyone to call 911. Be like, someone get me a stretcher right now. My throat's closing up. Yeah. But like, I'm laughing about it now, and I appreciate you talking about it, because I've had a couple of experiences just sober on an airplane where I felt like my throat was closing up and approaching, if not death, you know, me collapsing and having an embarrassing situation where I just wake up passed out in an airplane wondering what went on. And so I started to read about anxiety, and there's one method called the DARE approach to anxiety. And part of it is running towards. The R stands for running towards. It's like asking the symptoms that you're feeling to get worse, to basically prove to yourself that the thoughts combined with the bodily functions that are combining into this force of death, or what you think is death, don't actually have the power that they claim to have. So the next time that happened to me on a plane, I asked my throat to close all the way up, which is scary as fuck to do in the moment, because I'm like, maybe this is gonna work and kill me. Like maybe it is as powerful as I think it is. And as soon as I kind of just gave in to just asking my throat to close all the way up, like literally get tighter than an ass, like a sphincter, like just all the way, close the gap. I don't even want to be able to drink water. Immediately I felt this slight release. It wasn't like a magic pill, but I could feel just a wave of de-escalation running through me. And I kept asking my throat, close up, close up, close up. Like, you're trying to make me, you know, feel like I'm going to die. Just do it already. Mm-hmm. And then the combination of leaning into it and then just asking for the worst case scenario, that proved to myself that my throat's never going to actually close up from, you know, a sober state of mind without an allergic reaction or something like that. When you're taking mushrooms that you think are molds, you might actually be thinking like, am I allergic to something that is making my throat close up? So it was easier to do in a sober state of mind. But yeah, like having that feeling of I'm going to die is you can't really explain it to the person next to you. Like you can tell them, I think I'm going to die, but that almost makes it worse. It's so hard to navigate, because once you put it out in the world and you verbalize it to someone, you ask for help, then that makes it more real. But if you keep it inside your head, then my thoughts also start to spiral and think of the worst case scenario. So like in that moment with the mushrooms, how did you mentally map a way back to feeling somewhat good from the moment that those feelings of death hit you, and then going through the journey of being all right with the situation?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when this happened, I was at my house and I was sitting in front of two of my friends. So the first thing I realized, and what happened to trigger this actually was when I first started taking mushrooms, what we would do is we would just watch like really funny stuff. And then we would like get into the kaleidoscope at some point and put frequency healing on, yada, yada. So we were watching this show called Decker, which for anyone who knows about Tim and Eric, they have this spinoff called Decker, which is Tim Heidecker's other show where he's like this secret agent. And it's like hilarious. My dad used to watch Westworld and Martin Sheen's brother is in it as the president. So it's like this weird, it's hilarious. You guys got to check it out. It's stupid as hell. But anyway, so we were watching that and I was just laughing so hard that like it didn't even sound like laughter. You know how laughter has like a ha 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 thing? It was kind of just like ha ha, because it was just like so much laughter. I couldn't get it out of me fast enough.
Yeah, it's just like out of your control.
Yeah.
It's involuntary at that point.
Pure shenanigans. And so what happened was it triggered this response because I was like coughing it out kind of. It just all of a sudden like, it wasn't even like, wait, is my throat closing up? Did I eat mold? Am I dying? It wasn't like that. It was like all three of those hit in a second. And I went from like laughing to like, oh shit. Right. And so like, it was almost like a thought form just came into me and my being just took it as objective truth right off the bat. And so in that moment, I felt the fear response. I felt like that like sinking feeling and that like cold kind of like tingling feeling on your neck. And so immediately I realized, okay, I'm not going to side with this. I'm going to try to move through this and see what opposing thought I can put in there. That was my first step. So we're still watching the show. I'm still feeling the call to laugh. And this is all happening over like 3 seconds, right? So I feel this thing click in and I start telling myself, I'm fine. I'm fine. And every time I say I'm fine, no, you're not. I'm fine. No, you're not. I'm fine. No, you're not. Right. So I'm like, okay, that's not working. So like, these are very quick things. Like I try this. I'm like, that's not working. So then I tell my buddy, I'm like, hey, I'm going to put on the kaleidoscope. And they're like, kind of like, all right, we're in the middle of a show. But I was like, yeah, I just want the kaleidoscope. So I put the kaleidoscope on. It's like calm. There's no more like ridiculous stuff on the TV. And I sit back down. I'm fine. No, you're not. I'm fine. No, you're not. I'm like, okay, I got to leave the room. So I'm like, oh, and I just play it off like there's nothing happening. I'm like, got to hit the bathroom. So I go to the bathroom and I start pacing, right? I just start pacing. I'm like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And so at first I try to make myself puke, right? And nothing comes up. So then, and again, this is all over like 10 seconds. I realize, okay, I'm fucked. What do I do? Do I call 911? And then literally the voice was like, no, like, and I was like, okay, not doing that. And so then after about 5 seconds, I was like, okay, let me get back to my breath. And so I start breathing. And as soon as I took my first deep breath of like in through the nose, out through the mouth, like in a nice down regulatory style, the immediate thought came into my head, like, I'm not dying. And as soon as I had that thought, like with confidence, like, wait a minute, I'm not dying. It was like cosmic laughter hit me. But it was what I believe was it was from the spirit of mushrooms laughing at me, saying like, now you know our true power. And like, we had to check you before you wrecked yourself. Now you can go lay in bed and get some cool visuals, right? So I'm like still really out of it because this was like on the come up, right? So I'm like starting to like full on go out on like a 7-gram mushroom experience. And so I lay in my bed and I have the best experience of my life. And that experience, because I realized right away, as soon as I realized I'm not dying, I saw exactly why that happened. I connected it in that moment. I was like, well, I wasn't respecting the medicine. Luckily, I was in the right setting. I was just at my house, so with like 2 of my best friends. So I was like, okay, cool. I feel completely safe to have gone through this experience. But after that, I never fucked around unless I had a specific intention of why I was going to interact with that much medicine. And I would always do a deep, sober week where I would like really connect with like, what is the right amount for this experience that I'm looking to have? And I would always like commune with my soul and figure out what that was. And that experience taught me a lot. So as soon as I laid down in bed again, and again, this whole thing probably took, I don't know, 7 or 8 minutes. By the time I noticed, I thought I was dying, went to the bathroom, realized I wasn't dying, came back. My friends never even knew anything happened. I told them afterwards and we all had a good laugh about it. But yeah, I laid in bed and I had some wild experiences. That was like, you know, really the first experience I had where I realized, oh shit, I guess I don't know anything about this realm. Like I thought I knew some stuff. Here I was being like 23 thinking I knew it all. And I don't know shit about this. And that's what really, that was like the event that really catalyzed me being like, well, I need to start respecting this more. I need to start actually like, that was when I stopped watching things when I was, interacting with things like mushrooms, and I started focusing purely on frequency healing or darkness and just silence, things like that. So again, luckily, because I had done enough self-development at that point, I immediately looked for like, okay, how is this helping me? How is this serving me? And I found like a belief that I believed anyway, which was like, hey, this is pretty reckless to do. And I was going to a lot of music festivals, and I was like, thank God it happened here. Instead of me thinking like, oh, in an ego trip, like, well, I can do 7 grams of mushrooms at a music festival, and then having an absolute terrifying experience. So yeah, that's how that all went down. And again, very grateful I had that, because now I can speak from experience.
Yeah, your experience almost reminds me of doing a Muay Thai sparring session with someone that's much better than you.
Oh,
like in my gym, there are absolute killers in there, and when I'm sparring with someone that is just levels ahead of me, has been doing it for decades. I've been doing it for 2 years, so literally I'm a baby
I'm doing it for 1 year
to their
now.
Muay Thai skills.
Yeah,
hell yeah. I forget that person that I'm sparring is not showing me their full strength, and so I'll get a little bit cocky. And our rule in the gym is hit someone as hard as you're willing to get hit. And so I'll throw a combination, maybe I'll throw a kick, and they're leaving it open to let me get my work in. And I throw a kick that's pretty hard, and then they'll come back with a combination and just take my lungs out. And in that moment, I'm like, oh yeah, like this person fights professionally. Like they're literally a trained killer. And I'm someone that's been going to a gym twice a week for the past 2 years. And it's a fun interaction. It's a playful interaction, but it's a reminder that you're dealing with someone and you're dealing with something, a force that is powerful, more powerful than you had previously thought. And your amount of control that you have over the situation is a lot less than you thought. And so the only way for me to go about that in a sparring session moving forward is to kind of just be like, yeah, I will get my ass kicked if I keep acting like this. I'll go home with a concussion or worse. And so let me just be more playful. And I'm not trying to win a sparring match. And so early on, I definitely had a few shots that taught me some good lessons in the gym. And when you were talking about that moment of having respect for the shrooms, that brought me back to the gym where I'm like, oh yeah, like this could kill me if I keep if I'm not careful. This could put me in a place that I can't even imagine. So yeah, that's wild.
It's funny you mentioned Muay Thai, because I've been doing it once a week for the past year. And, I'm very aware. I'm like, man, dude, because the guy who trains me is a professional UFC fighter. So like, it's just so funny. I'm like, I don't even know if I'm good or not, because he's just so fucking good that it's like, I just constantly think I suck, but it's totally fine because I'm okay with that. But what these experiences do for me is they humble you, they humble you. And I've had some experiences since then that have been even more intense, but the difference was I didn't intend for them to be that intense. Like there was one time that, like a lot of LSD stories start with, I took something that I thought was a certain amount. It was way more than I thought it was going to be, but I didn't intend for that, right? So when I went into it and it started happening, I was able to say, okay, well, this must have been what I was needing at that point, because I had a certain intention of like, okay, I'm going to do 1 dose, and I ended up taking over 50 doses at once by accident. That's what happens when you mess with liquid.
You took 50 doses of LSD at one time.
Yeah, with someone.
Holy fucking shit.
Yeah, it wasn't just me. It was me and a friend of mine. And the story is actually pretty ridiculous. I've told it a couple times, but
are you still high?
No.
This was 2 years ago, and I'm still tripping out.
It definitely lasted. It wasn't full on for a couple of days, but I definitely felt it for a couple of days. But I didn't intend for that to happen. I would never have had the balls to do that. So for anyone listening, don't take this as a challenge of he did it. I'm like, no, I would never do that. And even now, when I tell the story, I tell everyone don't try to do that. I mean, I'm very grateful for the experience. It was amazing. It was life-changing, but it wasn't something I chose to go do. Whereas the mushroom story, that was like me being like, let me do more mushrooms than I've ever done. This was like me honestly thinking there was no LSD left in this vial. And what had happened was it had recrystallized. And so because they didn't use the right emulsifier. And so I was swirling a Q-tip around this bottle, and me and my friend were jokingly like licking it, being like, hopefully this is enough. And then like, poof, just like the whole world disintegrated. I started having the strongest synesthesia I've ever had in my life. Like so much so that it was just, I mean, I turned into a blob. I had to lay on the grass and stare at the stars because we did this at 10:30 at night. This is, again, a long...
Synesthesia is when you hear colors?
Yeah, like hear colors, smell sounds.
A certain number or something?
Yeah, it's when all the senses just kind of go and just like meld together. And,
oh my God.
And again, luckily, I was in the right setting. I was with one person who was the only person in my life that could have handled this. Besides me. And it wasn't that, you know, I'm over here, this psychonaut or anything like that. I just, again, had the tools to realize, well, this was more than you intended. You can either try to fight it and you can have a challenging, really fucked up experience, or you can just go, fuck it. I bought the ticket. I have to take the ride now. And what's the best setting for me to take this ride? Laying on my back, staring at the stars in silence. That was it. And so it was like the most beautiful experience ever, where I became one with the universe. I got into the Akashic realm, saw past lives, all this beautiful shit. But, you know, it was funny because this friend of mine has a very high tolerance for a lot of different things. And he's the type of person that, you know, he'll never let you see that, you know, he was affected by something. You know what I mean? Like he's that kind of person where, you know, he would eat things that, like, you know, doses of LSD that like I would have taken and been like, oh my God, that was crazy. And he'd be like, I don't even feel it, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, at the end of the night, you know, it was, the sun was coming up, and he was, we were at this house that had a pool that had broken, right? And so like, it was kind of like this above ground pool that was broken. There was like, I don't know, probably like a foot of water left in there. So he was taking his phone flashlight and shining it in there. And it was creating this crazy oil slick type looking thing. Because of course we were still tripping really hard. And so he looked at me and was like, dude, how much acid did we eat? Right. And that's when I knew. I was like, okay, it wasn't just me. Like, cause we didn't talk for like 10 hours. Like, when we went into it, I started having synesthesia like 20 minutes after I took it, which was insane because for anyone who's done
So you
LSD,
both took the same dose, 50 and 50?
It wasn't that it was like exactly 50, but what happened was there was a vial that he had that had been super dosed, aka pure crystal, been added to it. It just like I had done maybe one dose out of there before, and then over the time that he had this, it just kept dwindling and dwindling and dwindling with the closed bottle. And so I don't know, we thought like, I don't know, I guess it's just evaporating through the closed bottle. I don't know what I thought, right? But anyway, eventually it was just like 2 drops left in there. So it was like a full vial, and now it's just 2 drops. And so we decide, oh, we're going to do that because we want to do it before it just evaporates. It was really good stuff. And so we like take those 2 drops, and then I'm like, well, you know, maybe we can do a little bit more, you know? So I was like, all right, well, maybe like we can get the rest of the liquid off the side of the bottle. So we started swirling with Q-tips, and I swirled half of it, ate it. He swirled half of it, ate it. And then like, yeah, that's when shit got really weird. Like the first thing I remember like realizing was like after 20 minutes, I'm feeling it, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what is happening here? And then I started noticing my vision start to go. And again, it was at night. So like I started noticing like I had no depth perception. And I'm like the whole time I'm like, okay, this is fine. Okay, this is totally cool. So like I didn't really know what was happening, but I knew I'm like, something's different. And I'm like, I don't know what this is. I had no way to explain it. But, you know, it wasn't until about an hour and a half into it where I was like laying on the ground, like with the strongest echo of my life and like just the weirdest stuff happening that I was like, yeah, maybe it was something with that vial. But I was like, well, I can't do anything about it now. So I just left it. I just left it alone, and I just didn't think about it. And I was like, okay, this is the experience I'm having. And so we ended up laying down on the grass, and just like after about an hour and a half, we just didn't talk anymore. And we came out of it like 10 hours later. And I remember telepathically communicating with him and just like being like, whoa, are you seeing this? And he'd be like, yeah, this is crazy. So for people listening, this might sound completely woo-woo. I don't mind. It was my experience. I had it. I lived it. It was crazy, but I highly do not recommend that. It was not something I would ever replicate in my life.
So you were able to comprehend the energy, at least, even though you weren't talking. Your brain, like I'm thinking 50 doses of LSD, my everything just fractals, including my thoughts. And I'm just like literally like a dog drooling for 12 hours. It wasn't like that. You were able to still, even if you weren't speaking, you were able to comprehend the things passing through you and your friend.
So it was like for about an hour and a half, that's when like my ego completely clicked off. Like, so the last thoughts I had were like, okay, this was more than I thought. I'm going to have to ride this out and just thug it out. And so then I would have these experiences where I was just like, you know, in deep meditation, all of a sudden you just have an awareness like, whoa, I'm thinking that I'm thinking, or whatever those things happen. But you're still like so out there that like, you're not really like having the like, well, what does this mean? And what does that mean? You're just having this awareness of like, oh, that happened. And then you're just going back out. That's how it was. It would like, I would come in a little bit and then just go right back out. And every time I went out, I'd go farther and farther. And so I just remember becoming one with the stars and seeing all these different visions. Some points I had my eyes closed. Sometimes I had them open. I was laying in the grass, so I felt so connected to the earth. That's like all I remember really past that hour and a half point. Besides like, you know, realizing as I was coming out of it, like, oh, wow, like we've been communicating, like, because all of a sudden there was all this stuff when I came out of it that like we hadn't spoken a word, but yet we knew about each other's experience, right? Like, oh, when you did that and when you had that. And we were like, wait, how do we know this? We never talked. And so it was the weirdest thing ever.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was probably the strongest thing I've ever done. I mean, other than 5-MeO DMT, that was the strongest thing I've ever experienced in my life. And it was wild.
I don't know how many people have walked on the moon, but you may have shot yourself into a more exclusive place.
Yeah.
Seriously, how many people throughout history, if you had to guess, would you say took 50 doses of LSD or some sort of psychedelic? Like that list has to be a few hundred people, maybe. Maybe back in the day when people didn't know what it was or how strong it was, you're just eating random mushrooms and you take 100 doses of something. But LSD is much more of a recent discovery. So if I were to guess, I would say less than 500 people ever have taken 50 plus doses of LSD at one time. Like that is absolutely insane.
Yeah, it was wild, man. And you know, it's actually funny because I've thought about this because afterwards I was like, man, like I was you know, I was honestly shocked when I came out of it. I was like, man, dude, I've got to learn more about this before I ever fuck with that again. Like, because I realized when I came out of it, I started putting pieces together and, you know, I started being like, oh, yeah, okay. Like I started doing research and I was like, oh, LSD can recrystallize if it's not like, I think it's emulsified properly, but essentially if they're using the wrong, thing to not cut it. I forget what the terminology is here, but you know, essentially they used like some type of water or something like that instead of like whatever alcohol or whatever they use. But yeah, I mean, it was one of those things that I came out of being like, thank fucking God I didn't lose my mind and fracture my psyche, because I realized that was a real possibility. Like if I had tried to fight any of that experience, it would have ended really badly. Like, and I realized that right off the bat. And so I feel like I had that experience just so I could tell people, like, be fucking careful. Like, mushrooms, at least you know, like, you're not going to accidentally eat 50 grams of mushrooms, right? It's, like, pretty hard to do that. Maybe in an extract and when those come out. But
you have to get, like, a to-go box of mushrooms and then just down the entire thing.
Yeah. But, like, with things like LSD, I mean, it's just so easy to accidentally do that. So that's why I tell everyone, like, be fucking careful, you know, because it's like, you know, it's like, I think about it and I'm like, well, if there is some award that maybe I won for that, it was like you were a fucking idiot award, you know, but luckily you didn't annihilate your entire life coming out of that. And I've read stories about other people that have taken very high doses of LSD and they kind of say the same thing. Like you have to be like fully able to surrender. And for me, it wasn't even that I went into it super confidently. Like I was terrified as soon as it started coming on because I realized I'm like, something is definitely not right here. But I just realized from that mushroom experience, I was like, well, I can't fight it. I just have to fucking take it, you know, or I'm going to like potentially really fuck myself up. And I mean,
there's idiocy may be part of it, but that's like you going into an octagon with 50 UFC fighters and just being able to get out of 5 rounds without dying. Like that is unbelievable.
Yeah, it was fucking nuts. And, you know, it was funny because it took me a long time to ever go back to LSD again after that. Because, again, I was younger when I did this. I just didn't know what I didn't know. And these days, like, I can tell these stories and laugh about them now, but holy cow, was I so excited when I touched ground from that. Like, I was so grateful, it was just like, yikes. Cause, I'd done plenty of research at that point on, like what the risks were of things like that. Not that high of dose, but just with LSD in general and things like that. And, I realized with LSD, I was like, well, it's man-made. So it could be stronger. It could be made with different things, yada, yada, yada. So again, I was just super grateful I touched ground. But, all these experiences are why I started going more towards cannabis and why I ultimately made the program. Because even with cannabis, right, like people can get into some sticky situations. And so for me, like cannabis allows me to once again be in this human experience. It allows me to be able to know myself in different ways, which again, you don't need cannabis or any psychedelic to do this, but it's just my preferred method because it just resonates with me. But, what I found was that if we could develop a system that could allow someone to be able to work with cannabis and then understand the confines of like what might come out within that. So they have a structure for going into the experience and how to handle it and come out of it. But what comes out in that experience, we don't know. But then whatever comes out, we have some other systems to be able to frame that and be able to integrate it and things like that. I was like, okay, you're like, what side of history do I want to be on? Do I want to be on the side where it's like legalize it and just smoke it all day? No, I definitely don't want to be on that side. I want to be on the side of like, hey, if we want plant medicines as a whole to be looked at, not in this dirty way and release the stigma around them, well, then we each need to be the change. And so I was like, well, what better way to do that than be the change myself and start it and see who resonates with it? Because again, like, if people want to use cannabis as a substance, totally fine. I used to use it that way, and that's not inherently bad. What I found was that it was much more meaningful, and I was able to get much more from it when I connected with it as a medicine and a teacher. And so I tell everyone, I'm like, use discernment. If what I'm saying doesn't resonate with you, cool. Maybe it will one day, maybe it won't. But for those people that it does, those are the people I'm talking to, because I realize nothing's objective. So whatever I say is not going to resonate with everyone. But if I can come from my pure ultimate truth, well, then the people it resonates with are the people that I'm meant to talk to at this point in time. And so it's all good, when you really think about it that way.
And you had mentioned that you'd also experienced some anxieties with your early relationship with cannabis. How did cannabis first come into your life? What was the start of that journey like?
Yeah. So, funnily enough, cannabis came into my life as a result of me going through periods of anxiety in my life at about 16 and not really knowing what it was until I went to the doctor and he diagnosed me with generalized anxiety disorder, which then made me a quote unquote anxious person. When in reality, it wasn't that I was an anxious person. I was simply experiencing realms of anxiety at that point in my life because I was 16. I'm like, okay, college is going to start soon. What do I want to do with my life? Just a lot of things were coming out at that point. I think it's very common for people at that age to start experiencing things like this. So then I get put in this box. I start being told by him what is and is not possible for people with anxiety. And I end up getting put on a lot of pharmaceuticals. And, they just didn't work for me. Maybe they work for some people. Great. I'm not going to come on here and say all pharmaceuticals suck. I have my personal beliefs about them, but that's just my personal beliefs, right? My personal opinion. But for me, they didn't work for me. And so with every failed attempt at one of these pharmaceuticals working, I was stuck thinking like, is this the way the rest of my life is going to be? Because this does not sound fun, right? Everything that used to be fun is now giving me anxiety, or everything that's used to be fun is now allowing anxiety to come up throughout me. And so what I realized in that moment was like, okay, something's got to give here, but I didn't know what. And so I started talking to people in my network about this, my friends at that point. And one of my friends was like, dude, I don't know how this conversation actually happened with language, but it was something along the lines of like, hey man, I'm experiencing something similar to what you're describing, and I'm using cannabis for that. And I was like, what? And because at that point, the only image I had seen of cannabis was the lazy stoner archetype. I had some people that I wasn't directly friends with, but that were interacting with cannabis and they were just burning out, right? And that, again, was not cannabis. That was just them already being that way and using cannabis as a permission slip to further do that and have an excuse when people ask them. But that was the only image I had seen of it. So after a while of, saying, no, I'm not going to do that, and then my anxiety continued to get worse, I was like, okay, you know what? Fuck it. I'll try anything. So I gave it a try. And it wasn't like the first or second time I did it, like it was kind of like, am I even feeling it? And then the third time I did it, that's when, boom, I got the effect of it. And I realized in that moment, oh, I feel more connected to myself. And I don't know how I would have described that as a 16-year-old, but looking back in hindsight, that's how I would describe it. It's like, wow, I'm realizing that at that age, like, oh, I'm not my thoughts. I'm something watching my thoughts, right? And also, I'm not anxious. I'm just experiencing like shades of anxiety, because I started realizing, wait a minute, am I anxious every moment of every day? No. So I'm not anxious. I'm just experiencing it. So I had all these realizations that all of a sudden I was like, oh my God. So then I started integrating that by when I would feel anxiety, what I would do is go, oh, what is this thing? Is it talking to a new person? Oh, do I have expectations of how this person, how I think this person is receiving me? What are my self-limiting beliefs? Like all this stuff started happening. And I started questioning everything, because I realized after I connected with cannabis, I realized this didn't make me burn out. I'm playing guitar more than I've ever played. I'm going harder in school than I've ever gone. So if I got lied to about this, what else did I get lied to about? And so that started an ever long quest for me that's still unfolding to this day. But
yeah,
when I got into cannabis, I realized, like I said, that it helped me connect to myself. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. And it wasn't until about 4 or 5 years later that I really discovered like the depth of what cannabis could do in the human experience. And that was as a result of, when I was in school for psychology, now graduated high school, I started realizing I don't want to wear khakis the rest of my life. So I didn't want to just do psychology, but I was
good
like,
choice.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, leg prisons, but I was like, what do I want to do? And so I had this kind of like dark night of the soul. And then one day I woke up and started peeing blood. And I had no idea why. I was 18. And at that point, I wasn't healthy. I mean, I was like most 18-year-olds, smoking cigarettes, drinking on the weekends, eating Celeste pizzas, DiGiorno, whatever the hell I could get my hands on at that point. And so, I went to the hospital with my father. And on the way there, he was asking me, like, I just got to know, are you doing drugs? And I'm like, no, but I am interacting with a lot of cannabis, because at that point I was smoking every day. I was smoking multiple times per day. Because again, no user manual. I had no idea, like, how much do I use for this? It works for anxiety, and but how much, how often? I didn't know any of that. And so I saw him have a sigh of relief, which was very interesting to me, because here was my dad, who wasn't like a vehemently against, drugs type person, but he kind of always was like, just don't do it, man. Like that kind of approach. And here he was like, okay. All right, that's fine. We can handle that. And I'm like, what? So when we get to the hospital, I start showing him a lot of the research I've been doing on cannabis, like a lot of the new science that had been coming out, because this is like 2010 or 2011. And so he was like, wow, I guess I didn't know what I didn't know. And if you're in school and this is working for you, and he had known what I had gone through with anxiety, if this is working for you, great. And so at that point, we started the bond over it. He wasn't a cannabis user, but, he was just really excited that I found something that worked for me. And then a cannabis school opened up near my house. I asked him to help me pay for tuition, because I was a broke college student. He ended up not only paying for my tuition, but going with me to the school, which was fucking awesome. And so here he is, not interacting with cannabis at all, but coming to the school with me, because I had finally talked him into buying me a grow kit once medical got legalized here, because we could grow a couple plants now. I got my medical card. And my first harvest sucked. And I realized I don't know shit about this. So when I presented the school to him, he was like, well, hey, you're going to learn how to grow. It's a good investment. Is this something you want to do? I was like, fuck, yes, it is. And I at that point, there was no path for the industry. It wasn't even existing out here. But as soon as I saw it start coming, I was like, that's what I want to do. So we go to the school, we start learning all about organic regenerative agriculture, the science of cannabis, the pharmacological aspects of cannabis, the real history of cannabis, and all these different things. And so at the same time, we're meeting cancer patients who are coming into the school and are getting helped with an extract called RSO, Rick Simpson oil, or as it's also known, FICO, full extract cannabis oil. And they're coming in with their scans, right? Because the people that run the school, they were consulting with people that had cancer to help them start killing their cancer cells with cannabis. And this might be wild for anyone who hasn't heard about this, but if you go on PubMed, there are actual studies about THC killing cancer cells and CBD inhibiting their growth, let alone all the other constituents of the plant and their roles in the cancer spectrum. But we started seeing these people come in with their scans. Yeah, you got stage 3, stage 4, different types of cancer. Then 3 to 6 months later, sometimes 9 months, coming back in, no tumors there. Now, I want to make a very clear distinction. Cannabis is not a panacea. It's not like they were still drinking Coca-Cola and getting in fights, and going to bars and just using cannabis and now they're cured, right? It wasn't like that. They were doing a lot of other stuff along with this, like getting their diet in order, leaving the job that was giving them stress, any of these things. But they were using the cannabis to start actually killing the cancer off and inhibiting it from keeping to grow. And so,
these were people who rejected chemotherapy.
Yes.
Or they were also taking chemotherapy too.
There were some that took chemo, but most of them were doing it in place of chemotherapy and radiation. And, as this story will unfold, I'll get more into chemo and radiation too. And like kind of like the reason why I think a lot of people missed or decided not to do that. But, it's interesting that, I didn't really realize like why this was hitting me so hard at that point. Like, wow, this is really amazing. Like I was really obsessed with like these people that were curing their cancer. And again, I live in Boston, so we have the best cancer institutes ever here. I mean, Dana-Farber, all these places, and they were shocked. Like they didn't even know what to think. Because this was when this first started coming out. We're talking like 2012, so it was a totally different world back then, 10 years ago with cannabis. So they'd be like, you're lying, you're not using cannabis, right? And like, it was pretty funny. So anyway, I ended up going to my first music festival. I ended up interacting with MDMA the first time. Feel this deep heart pull to my father, which I figured, I'm in Vegas. My dad loves Vegas. I'm going to steakhouses. My dad loves steak. So I just figured it was one of those things. Well, when I get home, I realized, and he told me that he was diagnosed with terminal cancer and that he had like 2 months to live. He didn't actually tell me the 2 months to live part for a couple of weeks. But, here's this person that's my best friend that, looks the same as he looked before I knew he had cancer. Now he's got cancer, but there's nothing changed about him. So I'm having this like, what do I do with this information type moment? And I didn't want to view him as the sick guy. He didn't want to be viewed as the sick guy. But how do I go and like not take into account like the fact that my dad is dying of cancer? So after a couple of weeks, he chose to not do chemo and radiation. And this is where I'll get into like why I think a lot of people, some people did it, some people didn't. My dad had just got finished up bringing his brother every week for 3 years to Dana-Farber in Boston for radiation and chemotherapy. And he had watched what this had done to him. And so by the time he got diagnosed, he was like, fuck that. I got a great head of hair. I'm going out with style. I'm not going to change my lifestyle. This is who I am. So I was like, okay. So I had a choice in that moment. Do I love my dad for the person he is, that's raised me amazing alongside my mother? Or do I try to change him into the version of him that I think he quote unquote should be so that I can selfishly have him around longer, right? And so I had that choice to make, and very similar to the LSD experience, I realized, dude, there's really only one choice, and if you choose the other one, you're going to be in a world of shit of, trauma and things like that for years to come if it shouldn't have happened this way, coulda, shoulda, woulda, all this stuff. So I chose to do the first one, which was love him for who he was and just support him in any way that he needed support. And so after a couple of weeks, he started experiencing some deep pain. And so I started talking to him like, Dad, because at this point, still not interacting with cannabis. I was like, Dad, we're growing. Let's at least make our next harvest into RSO and start giving it to you. At best, maybe we can cure your cancer, right? But at least we can numb some of this pain out. So at first he was like, no, but after a while he was like, okay, let's do it. So here's my dad, who's never interacted with cannabis since like the 80s anyway. And now I'm giving him the strongest version of cannabis on planet Earth. Right. So I would sit with him when he was going through the experiences to make sure that he had his questions answered and all this stuff. And through that time, that's when I really discovered the true power of cannabis, because I was able to connect with my father in ways that I had never connected with him before. And I'm an only child, right? My mother and father are both amazing. And they really gave me the perfect childhood. We're all very close. And, I would go to breakfast with my dad, car shows. We hung out all the time. So this was like shocking to me that I was hearing stories that he had never told me before. We were taking the heaviness off of subjects like death, where he'd be like, hey, what do you think happens when you die? And it would be like this fun, exciting subject of like, I don't know. And viewing it more as a graduation than an ending, right? And so like, then I got to watch him have closure with my mother, with me, with his grandchildren, with his other children, and just with his experience of life. And so not only that, but, I can't say 100% that I know this was cannabis, but the doctors gave him 2 months to live. He had small cell carcinoma, very fast and very aggressive. And he ended up surviving an extra year past that date. And so I don't know if I would have gotten that time with my dad if it weren't for cannabis. So I am forever grateful to this plant. But when I realized the depth to what like that allowed me to do for closure, when I realized like, wow, this extra time with my father and being able to connect with him with cannabis allowed me to process and grieve his death before he even passed. And now it's not like I don't wish he was still here, But I see that happening for me because when my father passed, it really put a fire under my ass and allowed me to realize, like, I'm not going to be here forever. So what am I going to do with the time here? And so also it allowed me to realize that, hey, my father might not be here physically, but he's still all around me. And again, I can't prove this objectively, but it's what I choose to believe because it makes my experience of life more great and grand in nature. And so like coming out of that experience, I realized, wow, I want to do this for my life. And then I got into the industry, worked there for 5 years with over 5,000 patients, helped them with all things holistic health. And then at a certain point, our business got taken over by a corporation. It started smelling like office supplies in there. And I was like, I got to get the hell out of here. And then through a series of hilarious other events, Highly Optimized was born. And that's where Cannabis and everything got to. But it's really been the best and most fun journey, full of challenges and full of, all the things that starting your own business has been. But I wake up so fucking fulfilled every day. And every single time I run one of these classes and people are like, holy shit, they're just getting their mind blown. And it's not from what I'm doing, it's from what they're discovering about themselves and their own journeys. And they're realizing, not only am I getting value from this program, but I'm also realizing like, oh my God, I am powerful. Like that realization to me is what I live for, right? When people come to the call and they're like, I know I can do anything I want in life now. Boom. That's like, I just get smitten over that. And so that's why cannabis, right? That's how I got into this.
No, I mean, having an experience like that where cannabis, it sounds like gave your dad just a much more enjoyable, livable last year of his life. And in a way, the way you describe it, it sounds like he was even thriving during that period, even if his body was physically deteriorating. That's amazing because, I think about death more and more for myself, but also for my parents because they're getting in their mid upper 60s. I don't want to see them suffer in the last stage of their life on the way out. Part of the reason why I'm working hard now is so that I'm able to have the freedom to take a step back, and whenever that time is where they'll need me and my brothers to step in on a daily basis, that they are able to go through that process. So hearing about what you were able to do with your dad and have, cannabis be a big part of that, that's something that you can't put a value on. Like having someone being able to talk openly about death and to have some sense of comfort when they're literally at the door of death. I can't imagine the conversations you and your dad were having and the experiences just sitting there, because normally you'd be at a hospital bed, maybe your dad's unconscious, you're just kind of just wasting away the last 6 to 12 months of your life. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm sorry to hear about your dad's passing, but it sounds like he had a great stage passing through into, whatever lies after.
Yeah, man, and thank you for that as well. And, for me, it was like, my dad told me, he was like, listen, I don't want to die in a fucking hospital bed. I want to die at home, the place I know, the place I love, with the people I love. And I was like, okay. So there was, periods, especially near the end, that were really challenging about that, because he had brain cancer. And so, and he also, it didn't start in his brain, but it metastasized, because my dad was one of those people who was like, no, nothing's wrong with me, when like he was having these fits for a while. He was a 3-pack a day cigarette smoker. And again, he was my dad, but he had his things, right? And so, he had this thing going on where it was almost like pleurisy for like a year before he got diagnosed, where all of a sudden we'd be talking and he'd just double over in pain. And I'd be like, what's that? He's like, nothing. I went to the doctor. It's fine. And I'm like, that's not fucking fine. So by the time they figured it out, it metastasized a lot. And so he had frontal lobe cancer. So there was a lot of time where, there was just like periods where I was like, oh, is that really my father? Is it not? There was like, and of course I knew it was, but like I had to like be weary, of like, because I knew that he knew things were going on. Like when shit really got weird was one day he walked down and asked me where the bathroom was. And I knew at that point, I was like, uh-oh, that's not good. And about an hour later, he had a grand mal seizure, and the doctors actually thought he was going to die. They prepared my mother and I, like, okay, say your goodbyes. That's it. Right. And so I was actually, of course I was upset, but I was kind of like, you know what? If that's the end, that's fine with me, because, it was quick. He was completely his normal self up to when that happened. But after about a week of him being in a coma, induced coma, they all of a sudden brought us in one day and we're like, okay, so we're going to wake him up. He should be fine. And I was like, wait, what? What's happening here? And so when he came out of it, he was still himself, but he was a little off. And he would have moments of complete clarity, but it started getting worse and worse. And so by the end, I was very grateful that we were able to take care of him. There was some really sketchy moments, of like waking up and, the stove being on all night, and, my mother and I having to be nocturnal and take care of him. So it was definitely a challenging period. But during that period, the cannabis was the times in which, he was actually able to like laugh and have joy. And, I could sit with him and watch movies, because that was like one of our rituals. He loved movies. I mean, the stack at my parents' house of DVDs is fucking crazy, from when he used to buy DVDs every week. So, it was like those times where I realized like, okay, it just took the severity off of it a lot, where I was able to say like, you know what, this is your physical body. Yeah, they're going to break down over time, but this isn't who you truly are, right? Like, who you are is deeper than that. And so because I had those realizations from different psychedelic experiences and also cannabis, I was able to like almost not look at it like, oh, my father's dying. It's like, oh, my father's physical body is dying. And yes, I can be upset about that, and I can feel the weight of that being a human and allowing myself to be human. But a deeper part of me knew like, hey, this is okay, right? Like, this is part of life. It's okay. And you know what? Who he truly is infinite, and that infinity is around me at all points in time. And it was really funny too, because, and I don't know if anyone listening, or if even you, like if you've had anyone close, like really close, pass away, it was like my father and I had a lot of rituals. Like I was saying, like going to breakfast was one of our biggest rituals. It always wake me up at like these ridiculously early hours when I was a teenager. And be like, let's go to breakfast. I'd be like, fuck, Dad, I was up till 3 a.m. playing video games. But I'm so grateful that I said yes most times that he woke me up. But he would always get Eggs Benedict when we went out. And I fucking would always look at it and be like, ugh, it looks gross. Right after he passed, I went to breakfast with a bunch of my friends about, I don't know, a week or two after. And we went to the same spot that my dad and I usually went, right up the street. And I get there and I'm looking at the menu and I'm just like, I want Eggs Benedict. And it wasn't like, oh, logically I'm going to get Eggs Benedict because it's going to remind me of my dad. Like, no, I was craving something that I had never had before. And I was like, that's fucking weird. Right. So I get it. I fucking love it. And you can corroborate this with my girlfriend. I get Eggs Benedict all the time when I go out now. It's like my favorite thing. And so then my dad, when he got ice cream, would always get a strawberry sundae with chocolate ice cream, whipped cream, and nuts. Now, I eat ice cream a lot, but like the couple times I do a year, I'll always get a strawberry sundae with chocolate ice cream, whipped cream, and nuts. No fucking clue. Never got one before. And someone could argue, oh, it's just because your subconscious is wanting to remind you of your dad. I don't know, but it's fucking cool, because those are, to me, I take those as signs that if we all are walking each other home, like Ram Dass says, that's like my father being able to live vicariously through me. And he always said that to me. He's like, I still feel 16 up here. I'm living vicariously through you. So part of what I do in my life and what motivates me in those times that I'm feeling down or whatever is like, I got to give my dad a fucking cool show, and all my relatives that have passed away. And so that's one of the things that motivates me every day, along with empowering people to realize like, hey, you're more powerful than you've been told you are. Go fucking enjoy it,
That's a great way to look at it. The last great show, the final act. Yeah. 'Cause it's like the way that we handle it now in society, your death is when the show's over and then everyone's walking home and you're just kind of the forgotten stage prop wasting away backstage in a hospital. It's the hospital's the last place you'd want to spend the last months, weeks, or years for a lot of people at times in your life. So thinking about it as, okay, this is the way that my dad is choosing to go out. I will use cannabis, conversation, whatever it is, to enhance his experience, to make it a banger of a show, and then that's going to be it. I love that way of looking at it. Like this is something that is supposed to be exciting, entertaining, maybe I don't know if your dad was leaning into the food or the cigarettes on his way out, but like I would, I'm like, fuck it, I have stage 4 brain cancer. I'm going to rip cigs and smoke cannabis and enjoy my whiskeys and talk to the people that I love on the way out. That's the way that, if you can be in that situation, I'd take that all day, every day over being in a hospital and having people come visit me. Just be, surrounded by the people I love.
100%, man. And that was the thing, right? Like when he was like, "Can I get Coca-Colas?" I was like, "Hell yeah, you can."
Fuck
and like,
yeah, you can. Dad. You can have the whole bottle.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, "You want cigarettes? Cool. Let me just hang out with you while you smoke it, so it doesn't go into the couch cushion." Like I had to make sure.
Yeah.
But like, there were things that like we had to make sure that he wasn't doing like driving and things like that, which he was fine with. He was like, "I get it, obviously." But like I was like, "Fuck it." Of course, for me, I love being highly optimized. So I don't drink soda. I don't eat candy. I do everything I can because that's fun to me. But what was fun to him is living life the way he wanted to. So I'm not going to be like, "No, Dad, you have stage 4 brain cancer where you can't have a Coca-Cola." I'm like, fuck that. Drink the whole fucking pack.
Yeah.
You want a steak and cheese sub? Where do you want it from? I'll go pick it up from you. You want a pizza? Let me go where? What movie do you want to watch? Let's watch a movie together. Let's just fucking do whatever we're going to do to enjoy this life. And I think that if you take that, like one of the exercises I give people with cannabis specifically is a lot of people are like, when they're starting to work with cannabis, they're kind of like, what are my goals? How do I connect with this to, get into my life and figure out what matters to me and all this stuff. And what I tell them is, okay, we're going to reverse engineer this. So what I want you to do is I want you to connect with cannabis because it moves you from your ego and default mode network into your body and into your emotions and really into your subconscious too. And I want you to write your own eulogy, right? And I call this the cannabis eulogy. So I want you to write your own eulogy as if someone is, your best friend, whoever you want to say, partner, whatever, is writing this eulogy for you. What do you want in there? How do you want to be remembered? What are the accomplishments that you want to have done by the time you pass on? Then after they write that, they can actually reverse engineer that into goals. So maybe they want to be known as the person that was always able to pick people up. Well, maybe you want to be of service in some way, right? Maybe you want to give your joy to others. So then you can start being like, okay, what in my life right now helps me give joy to others? Well, I'm in this program for cannabis. Maybe I want to teach others about cannabis. Cool. Guess at that and try it out. See how it feels, right? But I think for a lot of people, like, we don't think about the fact that at one day we are going to pass on. And so like, what do we want to do in the time we're here? Because that's what really matters, right? Like a lot of us, and myself included, like I'm definitely guilty of this. We look into the future, we look into the past. What I've been realizing is that those are great to make some, tentative plans, but you want to be in the fucking moment, And so like when you write your eulogy, that's like a really deep exercise of realizing like, hey, this is what I would want. This is what actually matters to me. All this other stuff that I thought mattered doesn't matter all of a sudden. All I wanted to do in this eulogy was be the person that people could depend on and have done something that inspired other people. Cool, right? Now your life just got a lot easier. Now you've been able to prioritize things, And so these are like the types of exercises that bring people through because watching my father go through it, I was like, wow, life is so precious and it's so much shorter than we all think it's going to be. And so being able to actually contextualize and make sure that like, Hoka, hey, today is a good day to die. Why? Because I'm doing exactly what I love. If you can really do what fires you up and you can feel on purpose, then yeah, if a meteor hit the earth today, I'd go out yelling and screaming and being excited because you know why? I'm fortunate enough to be able to do what I love every day. And so I tell everyone like that eulogy exercise can really put a lot in perspective because you might start realizing like, wow, the job I'm working at is nowhere in this, right? So it doesn't mean you go in and quit your job right away. It just means like, okay, while I'm working this job and I have my rent paid and things like that, how can I make a plan? Maybe I can take this one course. Maybe I can do this weekend retreat. How can I like figure out what I want to do? And then when I actually start that business, then I can leave this job, right? So it's not about just like burn your world down, but it's just like gain awareness so you can make a plan to keep moving forward. So yeah, that's a really fun one.
I'm sure your dad was dropping so many meaningful tidbits on the way out with conversations and just being around your dad. Was there anything that particularly stuck with you that your dad said, whether it's a conversation as a whole or maybe a specific sentence, something that you knew in that moment would be a way that you walk from that point on, something your dad said to you that changed the way that you go through life even today?
Yeah, it was funny. So when he got sick, he made a folder on his computer called Just Notes. And it was just like all these little one-liners that he was like, these are the things that I've said to you, your whole life, with some other things too. So there was like a lot of stuff in there, like take care of your body, looking back in hindsight, he's like, I can realize that I probably should have taken better care of my body. But there was ones in there like, don't be car poor. So, and like my dad was one of those people who like, he was car poor, right? So like what I mean by that is like, I can really afford this car, but I really want this car, right? So you buy a car that's like way more expensive than you can really afford, but he just wanted to do it, so he'd do it. So it was kind of a lot of these were like, do as I say, not as I do type things, which we laughed over. But I think one of the biggest things was,
your dad's like, don't smoke cigarettes.
Yeah, exactly.
Like on there, like this exactly. 6'1" with a glass of whiskey. He's like, look, he's like, this is for you. This isn't for me. I'm done. Like this is for you.
But I think one of like the biggest things, that he put in there, and this might sound cliche, was, one of the ones was laughter is the best medicine, which my dad was like the ultimate, charisma guy. He taught me a lot about it. And, when he was teaching me that stuff, like I was still in the throes of anxiety. So I'd watch him be charismatic and I'd be like, oh my God, I could never do that. Once he passed though, that's when it started waking up in me. But I think one of the biggest things was like, the concept of like finding your joy and giving it back to others, and that was the one that stuck with me the most. It's just like, hey, do what you love, right? Find things you love and then share that love with other people, because that love that you share with them will allow them to tap into love and then share that with other people. And like, that's who my dad was at the end of the day. My dad was someone who he would do anything to support people, even to his detriment, even when he didn't have the most money after the recession and things like that. He would always, give people the benefit of the doubt. It was funny too, when my dad first purchased the window company from his father that he ran for, I think like probably 12 years or something before he got sick. There was, my dad always wanted to help people out, and that's one of the things that I got from him too. My mother's the same way too. But just this idea of like, hey man, I'm going to trust you and I'm going to help you out if I can. So there was, my dad lent money to a lot of people. That, were like, oh, I'll pay you back. Well, there was this one guy who had just got out of jail, right? And so he came to my father and he didn't tell my dad at first that he had gone to jail. And he was like, hey, I'm looking to start this, what's it called? Like repo service. And, could you give me a loan? And so my dad did some research on him, found out that he had just gotten out of jail. And so my dad was going to bring it up to him. The next time he comes back, he goes, hey, Harry, I got to tell you something. And he was like, listen, I just got out of jail. This is why, blah, blah, boom. If you don't want to lend me the money, I totally understand. And my dad was like, you know what? I'm going to lend it to you. He was the only person that ever paid my dad back. So it was like, that was the kind of person my dad was he was just that kind of person that would give people the benefit of the doubt and would help them out. And, that's the stuff that made him the most excited. And those are the ways I like to remember my dad for sure.
That's beautiful. I'm constantly reminded of that my own judgments of people or stereotypes of certain people in society does not mean that this person is not going to be reliable or this is not a kind person. This person's not going to pay me back. Like I've been slapped in the face with being humbled by that, where I thought someone was definitely trustworthy and they're just like, they're doing financially well off, everyone likes them. And then I get, stiffed and it's like, whatever. And then someone who I forgot to, that owed me something that I just wrote it off. I'm like, they're not going to pay me back. I'll get a Venmo like 2 weeks later. He's like, oh, sorry, I forgot about this. I'm like, wow, like that is, that's really cool. So it sounds like your dad was, had a lot of wisdom and was kind to people and willing to give them a chance. That's really cool that your dad did something like that to, give this guy a start in his business. And that guy ended up paying him back, and that's awesome.
And that dude was one of the coolest dudes. His name's Albie, and he treated my dad like royalty. Like, he'd have these big parties at his house, and he was like a really good party thrower. And my dad had classic cars, like my dad was super fun, and he would be like, "Hey, Harry, park your car right on the front of the lawn," because my dad loved talking about his cars. He was a big talker, so like he'd have him park the car right in the front of the lawn. He'd have him like be like the life of the party. It was just so cool to witness, because I learned from my dad that, yes, people might fuck you over, but if you walk around thinking everyone's going to fuck you over in life, then you're not going to have any experience of life. I would much rather get burned and feel like people are good than just expect people to be bad and allow myself to be tainted by that, and that's one of the things I learned from him is like, hey man, you know what? I'm giving these people chances because it makes me feel good to be able to give them that. And if they don't pay me back, no big deal. I'm not going to go look for them. I'm not going to go search them down. I'm just not going to ever do business with them again in that way, right? But I'm not going to go around thinking that like, if they don't pay me back, then humanity's bad and humans are bad, So that was one of the things. And my dad wasn't like the most spiritual person, but when you really looked at his life and when I go back and look at it, like he was a very spiritual person. Like he never talked about it, but like that is a very spiritual truth of like expect the best, right? And just like anything that happens was meant to happen. So if someone didn't pay you back, great. That person probably was going to cause you a lot of anguish. And now, because you gave them some money, they didn't want to pay you back, they're out of your life forever. So that was like the amount you paid to have them not affect you in any other way,
Except I would say the only exception to that is if someone kills your dog, then you have to go full John Wick on their ass 100%. And hunt them down in a club. Yeah, just start spraying in a club.
My dad was a huge
You
Keanu
pray
Reeves
for
fan.
everyone in that club. Yeah. Oh my God, dude. Like,
we were watching The Matrix with him,
I can't imagine the amount of movies and shows that you guys watched that past year, especially with cannabis. That must have been a good time. Dude,
it was awesome, man. And so like these are the things where like, again, I'm very grateful for this experience because you know what? It fucking broke me open emotionally. This experience with my dad, it really showed me what my heart was. And, being a guy, like we hear, like, I get jealous, right? Like women, they cry so easily. I'm like, man, I wish I had that button sometimes, right? But then I forget I do have that button. I just need to tap into what really matters to me, and that the reason they're able to is because they have more access to intuition and they're more easily able to find the things that really matter to them. But that experience with my dad, yes, he passed, and yes, I'm bummed that I can't go to car shows with him or, get woken up super early when I still want to be sleeping to go to breakfast or any of these things. But like that put such a fire into my ass. It allowed me to really ask, like, who am I? Right? It allowed me to realize like life is finite. What am I going to do when I'm here? It allowed me to be like, what do I want to do? Like, what is my purpose? What is the legacy I want? All of that happened as a result of my dad passing. And so, I choose to look at that event as happening for me because again, the other side is just a world of shit. If you think that the world's happening to you, you're just the victim of life circumstances, right? And it's just like, again, I'm not saying this is the only way to look at life, but if you want to be empowered, this is the way that I found to do it. And that's what I teach because, these experiences easily could have wrecked me. I have family members that, even with his passing, are still just like unable to handle it. And I get it, it's like, yeah, my dad was an amazing person and still is, but, it's like it happened. How do we choose to view it? That's the only control we have in life. Things just happen. And the only thing we can do is choose how we view them, our perspective on them.
Yeah. I'd be curious to ask your dad about the challenging and anxious experiences on cannabis that we were talking about before. Because when you have a panic attack and you're 28 years old, a big part of that attack is that, oh my God, I have my whole life ahead of me and I'm dying now. Are you fucking kidding me? Like I still had, 70 years to go. I would want to ask your dad if he did have a challenging experience on cannabis the last year of his life. Does being on death's door just like, does it not even enter your mind? Like if you're like, oh my God, I'm going to die. It's like, I know, like, that's fine. Did you ever talk to him about that? Like going through moments or things like that?
Yeah, he had some moments where like, he'd be like, hey, I can't feel my legs, and it was the cannabis. It wasn't the cancer doing that. So I'd be like, oh, well, can you see them? He's like, yeah. I'm like, all right, then they're still there. He's like, oh, all right, cool. So like little things like that. But my dad was like the most positive person ever. Like even when the recession hit and his business tanked, he would always still scrounge enough money for us to be able to go to breakfast. He'd be like, oh, it's fine. It's going to be fine. Totally fine. Right. So like he was that kind of person that just had that pattern interrupt of like when things got rough, he would just be like, hey, this is happening right now. And then I would be like, oh, like, yeah, again, like, can you see your legs? He's like, yeah. So I know it's fine. Totally cool. Right. So, I'm curious next time, because I really believe I still have communication with my father through the astral realm when I do astral travel. And also when I'm deep in plant medicine spaces. So that's the next question I'll go ask him. Be like, hey, Dad, what was the feeling there when you were at the end of your life and you were interacting with cannabis and feeling maybe anxiety come up? Did you have that feeling of like, hey, is this a big deal still because, you're at the end of your life? Is it not a big deal? I'll ask him that and get back to you because I'm always curious. I'm always looking for good questions to ask him. If I'm going to pull him out of that realm, I want it to be a good question. So
That's a fascinating concept. That do different substances, different drugs, do they have a map that corresponds to the stages in your life? Like people that smoke cannabis or do mushrooms at 20 to 30 years old, as a whole, as a population, they'll report significantly different experiences than someone who does it, let's say it's between 70 and 80 years old. That would be a really interesting study. Even people trying it for the first time, like someone that tries it for the first time at 20 versus someone that tries mushrooms for the first time at 70. Are those differences the same because it's the first time? Are they different because at 70, you're just like, you have all this wisdom and experiences and you don't give a fuck about a lot of the things you used to do? That would be a really interesting set of data, and just like being able to read people's experiences like that, to have an amalgamation of the average of the decade, like how it corresponds to the drug.
Yeah, that's a really cool study idea. And I think that like, intuitively, what I would imagine it would come down to is the life experience, right? Like, I think that's kind of like the foundational element now, because like what I would think is like not everyone, because I know from working at the dispensary, our big demographic was like 55 to 65. And some people had been using cannabis for years. Some had used it before, but not in years. Some had never used it. And so I saw within that group, some people would be like, I cannot interact with THC. I tried it. I got a huge panic attack. But I would see other people that like I could just tell, especially having met them. And like I worked there for 5 years. So I had like, rapport with people. The people that had like traveled to a lot of places, seen a lot of shit, done what they wanted to do, all that stuff, they seemed better equipped to be able to handle those challenging experiences. But they're like, oh yeah, it was fucking crazy, but yeah, give me another one. I'm down to try it again. Right. I'm like, holy shit. Right. So I imagine.
Yeah. They're like I've been divorced 3 times. Give me 50 doses.
Yeah, exactly. Give me something that will make me feel something, Whereas like the people that you could tell like, lived a different type of life. Wasn't better or worse, but like they worked that one job, they had that like, that one house, they had like a very, simple life. They were the ones that I found were like more like, I don't want anything outside of my normal box. Right. And so I don't know how to frame all that, but there is something there for sure. And that would be a really cool study, because then we could actually give more information on like, hey, if you're someone who fits into this category, like you like a simplistic life, you don't like a lot of surprises, maybe for someone like you want to do a full spectrum hemp extract that's going to be psychoactive but not intoxicating. For those of you out there that are thrill seekers, that have experienced a lot, that like traveling places alone, things like that, you might be someone that could connect with the intoxicating component of cannabis with Delta-9 THC and THCP and these other cannabinoids. Then from there, I feel like the secondary step would be actually, my buddy Len May has a company called Endo Health USA, where you can actually get an epigenetic test to show if you have any predispositions to things like schizophrenia, psychosis, etc. with cannabis. So I feel like this is where science is really helping out, because what I find is that, like for any plant medicine, they're not for everyone. And I would, I don't know what side of this fence I fall on. Like, would I want people to be able to know that beforehand so they don't have a challenging experience? Or is the challenging experience happening for them and maybe going to help them grow, but maybe not also? But I think like when we're going to bring this to
Do you mean knowing the genetics that they have beforehand?
Yeah. Like, because say for instance, like they find out they have a predisposition to something like schizophrenia. Well, if they didn't know that and then they interacted with cannabis, they might not have that actual schizophrenia turn on, but they might have an experience that maybe they're like, hey, I don't want to do that again, but wow, that really shifted something for me, you know? So there's two sides of the coin here for sure. But I think that, you know, if we're going to look at this in a harm reduction way, which is how I always view plant medicines, I think the best step would be to have some type of like study done first to show you like, hey, what type of personality do you have? And then almost like an astrology test or something like that, where you can go like, oh, if you're this type of person, maybe you're this, right? Or, you know, Symbiotica did one recently, like Symbiotica supplements based on your astrology sign. So like I'm an Aries, so it was like adrenal super tonic, right? So maybe one of those like cannabinoids or different strains or anything based on your personality pattern. And then from there, the second step would be like actually get an epigenetic test or a full-on endocannabinoid mapping test that allows you to see like what are my ratios of CB1 and CB2 receptors, what genes do I have that maybe can tell me a little bit more about what strains or different cannabinoids work for me. Does my liver metabolize THC slow or fast? And that can tell me what size edible I can take. Because I think that, you know, for a lot of us that have been in this world for a while, we kind of get the psychedelic realm. And it's not that we can't get traumatized still if we do something silly. But like if we have too strong of an edible, we're just going to lay down and it's not going to be that big of a deal most of the times. But you talk about people that are like in their late 60s, early 70s that have never interacted with cannabis. Cannabis might really work for them, but if they have a challenging experience, they might be just too traumatized to ever go back to it. And they might end up on pharmaceuticals that don't really work, you know, so it's kind of like for those people, because I watched this happen at the dispensary, how do we make sure that the most amount of people can have high quality results with cannabis and have information to support those results, right? So for instance, coming into a dispensary and going, hey, these are my epigenetic tests. These are the cannabinoids that work better for me. And these are the size doses that I'm looking for. What do you have within that context that will work for me? I think that's when we're going to start seeing cannabis continue to be destigmatized because, you know, again, it's not for everyone. And I think even the people it's for, like for me, I learned a lot when I realized like, oh, I'm a slow metabolizer for THC. That's why I'm a cheap date when it comes to eating cannabis, right? Like these kind of things just empower you with more knowledge. And that's kind of what intellect is made for, right? Like you have direct experience and then you have intellect to back up the direct experience and start to be able to have experiences that are more and more great and grand in the version and in the direction you want to go, you know? Because if I just learn about cannabis all day, but I never interact with it, well, I'm kind of like putting the cart before the horse. You know, eventually you're just going to have to go experience it, but then intellect can be there to back it up.
The genetic aspect is a tough question. If I had a genetic marker that showed that I may have an above average abnormal disposition to schizophrenic breaks on psychedelics, cannabis included, would I want to know?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think about that because so in that hypothetical, I would want to know, but I would probably start with a microdose or a very small dose of cannabis or whatever drug it was, and then have some. So hopefully there's some sort of limit that the research would say as you approach this is when we see the schizophrenic breaks tend to happen if they do. So it's almost like skydiving. When I signed a waiver for skydiving, I know that 99.99999% repeating, I'm not gonna die. I'm nothing life changing besides the experience itself is gonna happen to me, but it's still there and I still know the consequences of doing that. I would probably want something like that. Like you're safe around these doses. If you choose to approach this, you'll probably be fine with your genetics, but just know that this is a possibility. Then that would might change my relationship with cannabis early on, because I would be wondering in my head, is this me having a schizophrenic break? Is this me being too high? So that would definitely be challenging. It's a give and take. Do I want that possibility in my head, or do I want to go blind into it and just know that I won't know, it probably won't happen, but there is a chance? It's a really tough question. I don't know what the answer to that is.
Yeah. And the cool thing about it, though, is that it's an epigenetic test. So what I would love to see in there, too, and I forget if they put this in there, is like, what type of lifestyle changes could turn that gene off epigenetically so that I'm not predisposed to it? And what things or lifestyle habits could turn that on so that maybe I stay away from those if I'm looking to interact with cannabis? I think it's really important for people that have never interacted with it and maybe they already have some apprehension towards it. Those are the people you don't want them to have like a schizophrenic break. If they've never interacted with psychedelics, they don't understand this realm. And then, oh my God, I had this and now they're voting no on all the things because this causes schizophrenia, right? So I think for those people, we want to show them like, hey, these are kind of the tests. Like, just like when I sign someone up for Connect with Cannabis, they can't just hit buy now because there's certain things I have to ask them beforehand to make sure they qualify for the program, because it's both of us qualifying each other. They want to know what the program can do for them. I want to make sure that they're going to have the right experience in the program and that they're fit to interact with a plant medicine in a program. Because if they have a lot of stuff going on in their life, I'm just going to recommend they do some other stuff before they spend money on the program. So I think for people like that are new users, I think it's kind of like, okay, you've already gone your entire life without using this. So if you find this out and you don't want to interact with it, you're not losing anything, but we want to make sure that we're reducing harm and making sure that we're doing more good than harm with this medicine with those kind of people. And so I think those kind of people would be like the ones that I would see right off the bat as like the biggest benefit for getting this test. Because if they realize, oh, I do have a predisposition to that, they're not really losing out on anything. Maybe they could try CBD or something like that and still be able to be helped in the cannabis realm, but they don't know really what they're missing or anything with Delta-9 THC.
Yeah, you could decide for yourself if it's worth it.
Exactly.
If you choose to see the test. It sounds like the dietary version of cannabis where you can see your markers and certain strains may have one effect, other strains may have a different effect. You'll at least have some sort of map. Will the test show you what strains you may want to try over others? Is it almost like a recommendation thing too?
I think it would more show cannabinoids and terpenes. Okay. Mostly cannabinoids. So then you could take oh, maybe, say if you do have that predisposition, it's like, hey, don't interact with any of the intoxicating components of cannabis like Delta-9 THC, THCP, CBN, etc. So then you could go to a dispensary and be like, what strains do you have without these in them? Right. And for someone like that, you'd probably either want to go for like an isolate of CBD or CBG or something like that. Or if you did want to have that kind of entourage effect that stems from having all of the constituents of cannabis together, you could go for like a full spectrum hemp tincture that has 0.3% of THC or under. So it's not going to be felt, but there's enough in there that it can create that entourage effect, which basically says that if you take pure CBD versus a full spectrum, the full spectrum is going to be able to work more because that's actually how it was intended to be interacted with. So all those different constituents help each other work more holistically than an isolate. And so you could do that as well. And again, this part of the field is so new that I don't have an objective answer of hey, if you have that mutation, don't do it. But I think that being aware of those things is always important because as sovereign beings, right, the best way we can make sure that we're making the right decisions is awareness. And we can gain that with cannabis now, luckily, through these tests because the plant is becoming less stigmatized. It's becoming a real industry, legitimate. That being said, the industry is really interesting. It's a whole other rabbit hole for another day. But, I think that having these types of tests allows people to have this awareness so that then if they take this test and they choose to interact with cannabis and they have the schizophrenic break, well, they only have one person to point the finger at, they can't blame it on, they could try to blame it on cannabis and all those things. And a lot of people probably would. But at least then you could say, well, hey, you got this test and you knew you were predisposed to that. Why did you choose to interact with this? Right. So, there's at least some more information that can be had with these tests coming out now. And I think that's really cool. Personally, I think that, the whole indica sativa hybrid thing is outdated and not really a good system to figure out what strains you want to interact with because everything is pretty much a hybrid these days. So it's almost like, how, if you want a purebred dog, right? There's different things you have to do than getting a mutt, right? And very similarly, mutts are a little bit healthier in most cases, or quite a bit healthier. And with hybrids, you do have hybrid vigor, but the psychedelic properties of cannabis have actually gone down dramatically since the over-hybridization of cannabis, because we've focused specifically on delta-9 THC. Somewhere, somehow, people got it in their head that that's what matters in cannabis. So the more that there is, the better it is. That's like literally most people's rating system for cannabis. And so when I worked at the dispensary, I would have people come in, what's your highest percent? And so what I always say is that cannabinoids are the gas and brake pedal, right? So they'll tell you how fast or slow you're going to go, but in what direction? Left, right, up, down, energized, euphoric, sedated. That's terpenes. Terpenes are the steering wheel in your experience. And also, when you look at delta-9 THC, that is one intoxicating component of the plant. But for anyone who's ever interacted with hemp flower, which has 0.3% of delta-9 THC or under, you'll realize how much of the whole experience that you know to be cannabis is not actually delta-9 THC. So when you're focusing so much on that, you're omitting a lot of the other aspects of cannabis that a lot of times can give you this beautiful experience and a very different experience, right? Like if you interact with, say, like an old Colombian gold or a Panama red, and then you interact with like a really good landrace Afghani Kush or something like that, those are wildly different experiences. You might even think they're a totally different plant altogether. But now, with the over-hybridization, most things feel pretty similar. There's obviously exceptions, and I'm not against hybridizing things by any means. I'm just saying that when people are so stuck on this one thing, it'd be one thing if people were hybridizing and like certain strains were high in delta-9 THC, certain other ones were high in CBG, and they were like doing the whole cornucopia. So then we had all these different examples of like what cannabis could be. But it's just all this run-of-the-mill delta-9 THC craze, which I'm just not a huge fan of. For me, I like things around 18 to 20% THC. Why? Because when it's so heavy in delta-9 THC, which is great for physical pain or cancer or something like that, it makes me more dissociated. And again, I like to be in my human experience. I like to laugh. I like to talk. I like to receive downloads. I like to co-communicate with the plant. I like to co-create with it. I want to paint. I want to play guitar. I want to do these things. When it's that strong, a lot of times all I can do is sit on the couch. And so for me, that's not fun. In my dad's case, like that would be an example where, yeah, you want a higher delta-9 THC because it's great for pain relief because it does dissociate you a little bit. And also it's going to be great at killing cancer cells because it's delta-9 THC. And it's not the only thing in there that does that, but it's just the one that has the most research out on it that we know of at this point. And so I think like for me, what my ultimate goal is, or like what I'd like to see cannabis move towards, is that everyone can get an endocannabinoid mapping test that gives you a number. Right. So let's just say there's 1 through 100. You go in, you go to your doctor and they're like, all right, Zach, you're a 54. So now anywhere, and that will tell you like essentially what cannabinoids, what terpenes, what ratios, it includes all of that into that number. But all you got to remember is that number, 54. So now anywhere you go in the world, as cannabis starts to be more legalized, and if this universal system starts being out there, you could walk in and go, hey, you got anything in the 54 category? And they could go, nah, but we have a 52. And you could go, oh, okay, that's pretty close to what I want, right? So now you don't have to worry about like all the different phenotypic varieties within different plants, genotypes. You don't have to worry about any of that. All you have to remember is one number. And that's where I really think this is going to go towards. Doesn't mean you can't have strain names and all the fun stuff. It just means that it's a more accurate system for depicting what your individual endocannabinoid system is going to resonate with and benefit from with regards to cannabis.
Yeah, that would be great if the universal system became a thing, because I've had experiences where I smoke one time and then I smoke 3 months later and I don't know what I'm smoking and it feels like a legitimately different plant. I'm like, this is not the same plant that I smoked 3 months ago. This effect is different. Maybe I like it more. Maybe I don't like it as much, but it was so, it was nearly impossible 10 years ago to have some sort of consistent experience unless you were growing your own stuff, because you're just buying it from whatever dealers in your dorm or whoever you're getting it from. And even if you get it from the same supplier, there's no guarantee that you're getting the same strain or the same hybrid, things like that. Like all these things that are changing constantly, like changing with the experience of buying cannabis outside of a dispensary. And I'm sure like even dispensaries today, they're not all created equal. I'm sure some are more disciplined and more open about what's actually in it than others. I'm sure it depends from dispensary to dispensary, but if there was some sort of universal system, that would be amazing, especially for people who have had great experiences on cannabis and also anxious experiences on cannabis and everything in between, like a lot of people, and want to stick to some sort of consistent type experience while navigating their own mind. I want to ask you more about that. I'm going to take a quick piss and then
no worries. I'll take a piss too. Yep. Good bathroom break.
I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the 18 to 20% range for THC. What is your preferred method of taking cannabis now? Is it smoking, edibles, frequency, dosage, like all that? What does your routine of cannabis look like?
Yeah, so for me, my favorite method of ingestion is vaporizing. I love the Volcano because from Storz & Bickel, not only is it like the most magnificent piece of machinery ever. I've had mine for 12 years, I think right around 12 years now, actually. And it still works just as good as the first day I got it. But it also keeps the ritual surrounding smoking. So with smoking, you're first grinding something up. You're then like rolling something or packing a bowl. You're then lighting it. You're then passing it, right? So with the Volcano, you're still having to grind something. You're still packing a bowl. You're then blowing a bag on it. And then you're passing that bag around, right? So it's keeping the whole ritualistic aspect of cannabis. And so I don't mind edibles either. It's just that those are for like deep inner journeys for me. And typically, for most of my intentions that I make these days, I don't need to go that far out to get them or that far in to get them. It's like something that I'm just like a little bit stuck on. Like, hey, I have this curiosity between, I'm doing 2 podcasts. Should I stop doing one soon so I can have more time to do this other thing? Right. So like questions like that. And in terms of frequency, what I've found to work really well for me is I interact with cannabis a maximum of 2 times per week on the weekends, Saturday and Sunday. And I'll tell you why. For me, right, in my subjective experience of life, I found that my pattern with cannabis was to numb out on the weekdays specifically, because that was when I was most prone to stress. And so that is why I go through my weekdays completely sober and I track what stresses me out or triggers me. So I have a journal that I write all this stuff down in. And then on the weekend, I connect with cannabis and I make my intention to go into any one of those things that triggered me. Maybe there's a theme to all of them. Like maybe it was all surrounding, Rachel, and it wasn't anything to do with her, but I just got triggered from something she said or a couple different things she said. Maybe it was around podcasting and there was a bunch of different questions. So I kind of generalize based on like, okay, what's the common theme or thread between all of these different things that triggered me? And then I make that my intention to go right into it. It was like you were talking about in the beginning, the best way out is through, right? So the DARE approach to anxiety, right? Like you want to go directly into it. So I ask cannabis, like, please show me and illuminate for me what I'm missing here, why these are triggering me, a memory, a thought, feeling, sensation, whatever. And also, I ask that you show me this in the most gentle, kind, and loving way. Because Hamilton Souther was actually the one who showed me that addition of the intentions. He was like, when I sit with ayahuasca, I want this plant to be the most gentle, loving, and compassionate healing plant for me. I don't think healing has to be hard. And that was something that I've been saying for a long time now. I feel healing can be light. Yes, healing can be challenging, but it doesn't have to feel hard, and I think that when it does feel hard, it might be because people are just expecting it to be hard, when in reality it doesn't have to be. And so then that weekend, I connect with cannabis and I get some insights, downloads, ideas, whatever, and I jot those down as I get them. Like, oh, this reminds me of this memory. Okay, this, that, boom, boom, boom. So now I have some talking points or footnotes to go into the next week with. So then on Sunday, I take all those notes and I figure out like one action step. Usually it's one, maybe there's 2. I don't try to do any more than 2 because it's, it's a lot to integrate in the week. So I figure out like 2 action steps. So maybe like I'll tell you one that recently happened. So I was having challenges in business where like I was just like getting burned out, and I was just like getting really frustrated, and I felt like I was at the end of my rope a lot of the times. And I knew, I'm like, I love what I do. I'm like, why is this happening? So I sat with cannabis, and basically the first thing, like literally the first hit I took immediately was like, stop taking yourself so seriously. Stop putting so much pressure on yourself. Like, you don't need to do 10 podcasts a week. You're doing this to yourself. There's nothing in business that's doing this to you. It is a pattern that you have, that you learned from your parents because they're go-getters, but they also don't have an off switch either. So you learned that the only way to be successful is just to constantly be on. And so I was like, oh, so then I figured out an action step of like, okay, I'm going to stop working by 6 p.m. every night. And I'm going to have a recognition ritual of taking a shower to tell myself I am done with work for the day. And then I'm going to do whatever my heart calls for. So play guitar, read books, watch Gaia, go for a walk, ride my bike, whatever it is. So that was something I integrated. So then that next week, I felt like, oh, that was cool. But now I'm starting to realize, oh, I have a really big challenge relaxing. Why do I have a challenge relaxing? So then that was my intention for the next week, right? And then so on that weekend, I go in and I connect with that. I'm like, what's going on with the relaxation thing? And then I realized like, oh, to me, relaxing means I'm not doing enough. So therefore, I don't feel like I am enough when I relax. And then it was like, oh my God, when did I learn that I wasn't enough? And it wasn't from my parents directly. It was watching how they treated themselves, right? So then I realized like, oh, it's not their fault. They always showered me with love, right? They did, like, literally, I had the picture perfect childhood. It was fucking awesome. And so I realized like, oh, I witnessed how they treated themselves and how like their actions were basically coming from a place of not enough, not enough, not enough. So they were going hard at it. So then that next week, I made a list of affirmations, right? And when I was done with work every day at 6, I would then first repeat those affirmations. I would do it in the morning and then at that point of the day. And then the next weekend, that integrated pretty well. So maybe that next intention is, hey, I want to see like what's going to be my next level of happiness. And so it's this cyclical process of like, okay, I'm going to go train, then I'm going to test it out. I'm going to train, and then I'm going to test it out. And I use the race car analogy for this, right? Like if you're a professional race car driver, well, you're going to take your car out on the track, let's say Monday through Friday, and rip it up. And then you're going to figure out what broke, what like was the weak point. On the weekends, you're going to get into the garage and you're going to work on the stuff, and you're going to illuminate like, oh, my carburetor's all fucked up. Oh, my throttle, cable is bent or whatever it is, right? You're going to fix that, then take it back out on the track the next week. And it's just cyclical like that every single week. And so there are some weeks where I realize on the weekend, like, oh, I actually didn't really come up with anything this week, and I'm going to skip a week. Maybe I'm going to skip a whole month. But typically I'm doing it at least once per week because I have a lot of questions, honestly. I have a lot of things that I get down on. So that's how my frequency looks. And what I tell everyone, if you're listening to this and you're like, where do I start? It's not like 5 days off is the right answer. It's just what I've found works for me. But what I tell people is, something Paul Chek says a lot is that anything you can't take 3 days off of owns you. And so I think for anyone listening, a great place to start would be taking 3-day breaks from cannabis. And then the day you come back to that day being your ceremony, where you're going to go into it with intention. You're going to create a ceremonial space. To do that, you just have like a nice room that you're going to do it in. You sage and Palo Santo yourself. You do a 7-directional prayer. There's many different things you can do. That's my method. And then you just lay down for the experience and go into it, right? Or maybe you play guitar if your intention is to play guitar, whatever it is, right? There's no right or wrong answer. But I think that 3-day break has been really powerful. And that's what we teach in the program. Every week we have people do a minimum of 3-day break. And it's not like if they show up and they didn't do it, we're like, you're kicked out of the class. But if they can't take that break, that means something's coming up. And we're like, okay, cool. Let's dive into that. What's coming up to tell you need to numb out with cannabis every night to feel comfort, because like I said in the beginning, cannabis being a feminine medicine, why a lot of people become dependent on it is not because cannabis objectively is dependent forming or addictive. Because if that were the case, every single person that ever interacted with cannabis would have become addicted. And that is just not the case. And I can say that after working with over 5,000 patients in the industry and over 1,000 now in my personal practice. And so what's left there? Well, there's something missing. So what's missing is that for people that are living in feelings of discomfort that feel they cannot get out of them, feelings of comfort are very addictive. And so whether it's exercise, food, cannabis, or whatever else it is, whatever provides that comfort, they're going to keep going back to feel that comfort until they learn how to give themselves their own comfort. And so that's where a lot of people get into some slippery, or like some mucky waters with cannabis, because they're unaware of that. And then all of a sudden they just start noticing, I feel like I just need to use cannabis for everything now. And they're not aware of this. But if they learn like, hey, it's feminine medicine can provide feelings of comfort, which if you're living in discomfort can be very addictive. So be aware of that. And if you start noticing yourself using more, start asking yourself why, right? Like just that piece of information right there can allow people to have so much more awareness to why they're connecting with cannabis so often.
What do you mean by everyone who's ever tried cannabis would have become addicted?
Yeah. So what I mean by that is that if cannabis was objectively, because a lot of people say, oh, cannabis is addictive, and I'm like, I don't believe anything is objectively addictive, right? Because if anything, like for instance, there are people that have done even things like cocaine and did not get addicted. There are also people that it ruined their entire life. Cannabis is the same way. There are people that interacted with cannabis and just like felt the call, cool, I'll do it a couple of times a year, once a month. There are other people that tried cannabis and it became their entire life and they were smoking all day, every day. So it's not objectively addictive, right? If it was, everyone that ever interacted with it would be using it all day, every day, But if they're not, then there's something else going on. And my best, my best research on this has shown that it's the feelings of comfort, right? It's escapism with cannabis, right? Like if people are living with some things, trauma, any of these kind of things that get in the way of us enjoying our lives, we're going to look for things externally that can help us feel comfort, until we actually learn, we can actually go into this stuff with cannabis if you want to, and you can actually illuminate this trauma and work through it with integration so that you don't feel like you need to interact with cannabis all the time to feel safe or to feel comfort in the world around you.
Have you ever read Drug Use for Adults by Dr. Carl Hart?
No.
It
sounds like a cool book. I'm writing it down.
It totally changed my view on taking drugs and the way that drugs interact and how substances, the difference between people becoming addicted to a substance and a substance being addictive itself. And Dr. Carl Hart is a researcher and a neuroscientist at Columbia in New York City. And he's been giving people drugs for decades in research settings, and also is an open, he's, the way he puts it is he's come out of the closet as a professional drug user. He's used heroin, he's used cocaine, smoked cannabis. Like he's experimental and open and honest. And he even talks about at points in the book where he's on purpose induced an addictive state within himself to heroin in order to experience withdrawal and what it's like to come out of that, which,
wow.
he's not recommending, but for him, that was what he wanted to do. And I'm sure helped him understand what people go through when they're addicted to a substance like that. But he completely changed my view on a drug being black and white, which is how I was raised. My parents have different views than me on drugs, but this drug being okay, check. This one, X, not good. This one, check. This one, not good. And so I had that programming in my head for 15, 20, 22 years. And I started to experience different drugs myself. And I found more and more like I'm having, when I'm in the right setting, when I'm doing the amount that is good for that time, and when I know I'm getting a good product, I find that I'm able to use drugs that have previously been, X'd through by my parents and myself to enhance my experience in the moment, and to be like, wow, like this is making my life more fulfilling. And this is exactly what I wanted for this day or this night. And I'm able to step away from this drug, and I didn't, become homeless after trying it once, which is like the narrative for drugs like cocaine or Molly or whatever. And you can use substances, and I mentioned opening a certain slice of reality, choosing to live in a different lens of reality for a period of time, and then going back to sober reality and developing a relationship with that. Dr. Carl Hart talks about his own journey, his own experiences as a drug user, how drugs have helped him live a more fulfilling life. And talking about drugs that are, I've no plans to try a drug like heroin. That is just not on the cards for me. Most people I imagine feel the same way. But hearing him talk about drugs that I have used, like cocaine or ecstasy, smoking cannabis, and he is a neuroscientist at Columbia that is a father, says he has a great relationship with his children, good husband, and he also uses drugs. That to me changed it changed the way that I look at what is the problem with addiction. Like, are we only focusing on the drug, or are we focusing on the way that people are living their lives? Do they have a purpose? Genetics, all these things that come into play that are a clear picture, rather than just stamping a drug addictive, done, like, let's move on.
Exactly. And that is you just perfectly articulated my entire mission with cannabis, and also with just empowering people. Because if you're someone out there who wants to think there are objectively addictive things, then good luck. You're disempowering yourself, right? And you're saying oh, I have no control over this, so if I try this thing once, it's going to become my whole life. No, that's just not accurate, right? What happens is we can either look at the symptom, right? Which is oh, I'm interacting with this drug. That's the symptom, right? Or you can look at the root cause that's leading you to that symptom, right? Which is that trauma and escapism. Trauma is the gateway drug, right? That is really what it is. And escaping that, not because people wake up in the morning and go, you know what I think I'm going to do? I'm going to choose to avoid all my trauma. But people are not aware of these things because they're never taught in school. And so for anyone listening, I feel for these people. I was one of them, right? Where I went through challenging things in my life, especially my father passing. And then I just didn't know what I didn't know. And so all of a sudden I just was getting called to use cannabis more and more and more. And it wasn't something that, I was still only using it once per day at night, one bowl. I wasn't going all day or anything like that. But I needed it that once per day. I felt like I really needed it. And if I didn't know what was going to happen. And it wasn't that the plant itself was addictive, because now I'm telling you I have no problem going 5 days without it every week, sometimes months at a time. But it's because I looked at what was scaring me and leading me to numb out with it, which was this, this feeling of not being on purpose in life, putting too much pressure on myself. I mean, there's constantly new things coming out, but seeing it all happening for me, and that oh, this is what I get to move through because now I have the tools to do it. And that's why I'm so big in the program, teaching people how to gain self-awareness with cannabis, so that the thing that maybe at one point they felt addicted to can be the thing that actually helps them break that thing and tune back into their own self-awareness, so that they can be empowered in their lives. And
speaking of breaking the narrative, how many times did we hear when we were younger that weed's a gateway drug? For me, alcohol is by far the number one gateway drug. I've never smoked weed and I've thought I want to put something else in my body. Every new drug that I've tried, Adderall, Molly, Coke, whatever, I've always been drunk the first time. In college, inhibition lowers a little bit. Oh, what are you guys taking over there? Let me do that. You feel like a superhero. You feel like a superhero when you're drunk. I've never felt the desire to try more drugs when I'm on cannabis. That has never entered my mind. But yet we're told that that's the gateway drug.
Yeah, I mean, you might want to make an amazing pizza or something, but that's really all you're going to do when you're interacting with cannabis. And I think that, I always say cannabis is a gateway drug, but they never finished the sentence, right? It's a gateway to whatever you choose it to be a gateway to. It can be a gateway to sitting on the couch, or it can be a gateway to inner awareness, or it can be a gateway to whatever you want. But it's whatever you choose, consciously or unconsciously, for it to be a gateway to. And I 100% agree with you. I've never once interacted with cannabis and been let's go interact with this. I mean, maybe mushrooms, but at the same time, not when I'm connecting with cannabis. I'm not let me smoke a joint and then eat mushrooms. Never. Literally not once, right? I might be oh, I wonder if this is similar to mushrooms, but I'll think about it and then I'll do research and yada, yada, yada. But on the times that I have interacted with alcohol, and other things have been around, oh yeah, for sure. And, you know, it's not that I've even gone into them, but I've been like, I would do that now. When I come out of it the next day, I'm like, I'm so glad I did not do that. Luckily, alcohol and I never really got along. I don't know if I have a genetic predisposition against it or something, but I would get a couple of drinks in and get a headache almost every time. The one thing I did like was like having, especially in the fall here, like having like one of those like pumpkin beers with like the sugar rim. Like I would do that, you know, back when I was like in my 20s and stuff. But yeah, alcohol and I never really got along. I was always much more of a cannabis guy, you know, so I lucked out in that way.
Yeah. For me, whenever I drink the sugary mixed drinks with alcohol, that's when I get a headache while I'm buzzed. And, you know, hangover is a different story. But since the past few years, I've been sticking to whiskey and tequila for the most part. And so if you're interested in experimenting with alcohol, I don't know the research to back this up, but I know the saying is clear alcohols are less headache inducing, like tequilas, vodkas, things like that. I've experienced that to be true. It may not be true for everyone, but you know, if you're curious about it, as we end up,
you know, I did.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I when I went to Mexico, I did enjoy mezcal. So I think your theory has something there, you know? It was funny. They were like, hey, do you feel full? Do you want something to help with your fullness? I was like, yeah. And then they just hand me mezcal. I'm like, wait. Can you explain how this is going to help me? But it actually did really work. And that was something I actually did enjoy, you know? And I always thought people were like, not joking because I got it for beer, but like I enjoy the taste. But mezcal, yeah, I did enjoy that. I never got drunk off of it, but it was just to have a little glass and, you know, just enjoy it. So,
I love it. As we end off, I want to ask you something that I'm sure will prompt a million different pathways in your head. But if there's something that sticks out in this moment right now, what's something about life, something you understand more deeply about life that you wouldn't have understood had you never smoked cannabis?
I have to I know exactly what I'm going to say, but I have to figure out how to frame it. So, that there are unseen forces looking to take your power away from you. And that the most important thing you can do is tune into your own truth, because at the end of the day, that's what we're here to do, is distinguish between good and evil. And there is no objective good and evil. It's what is good for you and what is evil for you as the individual. And so, you know, something I would have never understood is how many organizations are looking to sell you things, you know, looking to convince you to do things, looking to use fear mongering to convince you to do things. And if you're not aware of that, how victim you're going to fall to those things. And so if I had never interacted with cannabis, I wouldn't have had that moment of realizing, wait a minute, I got lied to about cannabis. I wonder what else they're lying to me about. And, you know, I wouldn't have been able to have that whole venture of going through that and realizing like, wow, thank God I started listening to my own version of truth. And the other thing too, because there's two, I'm going to break the rule here and
go for it.
But the other thing I realized was that the only people I'm going to listen to, if I am going to like take some wisdom from someone and try it on in my life, are people getting the results I want. So let me paint a picture for you, right? Let's just say that the last couple of years, there was a thing going on. Right. And a lot of the people saying a certain narrative about the thing were people that had guts out to here and were otherwise very unhealthy looking. And so for me, I looked at that and go, Then I see people like Paul Chek, Shervin Jafaria, and my own intuition saying all the same thing, right? About being sovereign and about immune systems working and things like that. And so I look at those people and I go, well, those are the people getting the results that I want in my life. They're healthy. They have high quality relationships. They're on purpose. So those are the people that if I was going to take wisdom and try it on for my own size, I'm going to take it from those people. And so those two awarenesses, right? How many people are vying to take your power away from you, whether it's a conspiracy theory or just the fact that like they understand marketing and they understand how the mind works. So they're going to use psychology to try to pull you into what they think is good for you, and or the side where the only people I'm going to listen to and allow in my network are people getting the results I want. And everyone else just doesn't exist to me.
Yeah.
And that's the two things I would say.
I think it's Brene Brown that talks about it. She only takes advice from people who are in the arena, and, you know, everyone else can fuck off. That's not her exact words, but I mean, it is true. Like you get unsolicited insights and advice from so many different places from people that have not been in the arena that you've chosen, and it's useless unless, you know, you've you're teaching people about cannabis, or you're recording podcasts, or you're a Muay Thai fighter, like whatever it is, if someone's not been in that arena, then how could they even begin to tell you what may be a good path or a bad path?
Exactly. 100%. Yeah, I think that's like a good way, because there's more information than ever, right? So for anyone listening, just like if you're going to take advice from someone or look for who to listen to, look at people that are getting the results you want, and then just control alt delete all the other people out of your life. Not like family and things like that, but I'm talking like if you're looking up to people that maybe you don't know personally, but like, you know, the Paul Checks, like the idols, right? The people that like, you're like, hey, that person is someone who has wisdom that I want to gain from. Just only listen to the people that are getting the results you want, because otherwise you're just going to get all confuctuated in your head.
Where's the best place for people to check out your teachings, your podcasts, everything like that?
Yeah, so the best place to find me is on Instagram at The Real Ryan Sprague. That's my personal account. My last name is Sprague. And then we have the business account as well at highly.optimized, where we're constantly giving out new tips and tricks and podcast releases as well. The podcasts you can find on Spotify, Apple, Audible, pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And those are the Highly Optimized podcast, which showcases conscious leaders living a life beat to their own drum. Think of like a classic hero's journey podcast. And then the This One Time on Psychedelics podcast, which dives into true firsthand accounts of the benefits, risks, experiences, and transformations taking place in the ever-expanding world of plant medicines. And also, we have a free Facebook community called the Ceremony Circle, which you can find a link to in my link tree on Instagram. And then we also have a fantastic free lead magnet called the Conscious Cannabis Guide. So if you heard what I was talking about today and you go, okay, I'll entertain this, you know, I'm curious, and you want to take a deep dive into it without having to sign up for the program or anything like that, you can go over to the link tree in my bio and download that. And that's going to give you the 3-step process to becoming conscious in your relationship with cannabis, and the 3 ways to understand the language cannabis speaks, which we briefly went over today with the feminine, mirror, and imagination medicine, but I go much deeper into it there. And then if you're interested about the program, you can find the link to sign up for the discovery call in my link tree as well. And we'll have Grow with Cannabis available by Thanksgiving, which for anyone who's looking to cultivate the best high quality cannabis in the world, this is going to be my 14 years of cultivation experience, all in a 16-week program. That is a self-guided course that you can use to not only grow your own medicine, but also teach others how to do it as well. And so I'm really excited, and those are the places you can find me.
Thank you so much, Ryan. This has been an absolute blast. And shout out to Dave Robinson for pointing me in your direction. This, you know, another fellow savage. He's a beast. And again, thank you. I appreciate your time. This was awesome.
You're so welcome, man. Dave's the best. Yeah. And thank you again for this, dude. I had a friggin' blast.
Amazing.